Lord of Industrialization. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 351 There is really prey. Shortly after dawn, a man-sized orange sky lantern floated from the top of the mountain. Its rope, tied to the treetops, swayed gently in the breeze, making it particularly conspicuous from the air. 3 hot air balloons flew toward the hilltop where the lanterns lay. There was a large clearing there, large enough for one of the airships to land. Resupply was quickly completed. In addition to the routine supplies, a 5-man team from the Black Cat unit arrived, along with their supplies. Metzger smiled and said to his old squad leader, "I didn't expect our food supplies to be so fresh." The old comrades met on the battlefield, and Babo's first words to him were, "From today on, you're not allowed to talk during meals." Metzger smiled and asked about business. "Why are you here?" Babo replied, "We're going from here to the enemy camp." Metzger immediately understood that these black cats were planning an infiltration operation and apologized, "I didn't know you were coming. Now we have a long mountain hike." Babo thought he meant it was morning and that they would be discovered if they took the main road, so he said, "No problem, we'll set off tonight." Seeing that he had misunderstood, Metzger took him down the mountain to have a look. "Wesson curse," Babo cursed as he looked at the place where the road used to be. "How did you do that?" The road at the bottom of the mountain was once passable for people and livestock on foot, as well as for 2-wheeled carts. Now it was covered in knee-deep mud, and no animals except loaches and slimes could move on it. Metzger said proudly, "Our mission is to block the traffic, but we are outnumbered, so we have to use our brains. You city people don't know, in the past, during the rainy season and the snowmelt season, the roads outside the city were muddy. The only difference was how deep the mud was. In deep places, you can sink into a horse's stomach, so we diverted the springs in the surrounding mountains to the road. Now it hasn't been long since the rainy season, and it rained a few days ago. The water has been soaking for 2 or 3 days, and the roads in many places are impassable. We have set up observation posts and ambush positions on the mountains, and pre-stored bullets and magic crystals. There are zip lines in the valleys. If someone breaks in, we have enough time to rush over." Babo nodded. There was nothing wrong with this arrangement. On the way back to the camp, he said, "You have to be careful. The Beast Tamer group of the Legends Alliance has a lot of forest monsters." Metzger smiled and said, "You have to be careful. If you are discovered, the enemy will definitely release them to delay you." Babo showed an extremely proud smile on his face, and took out a long black badge from the left chest pocket of his military uniform and flashed it in front of Metzger. Metzger was surprised when he saw the 2 green stars on the badge, and asked, "When did you become an excellent necromancer?" "You are already an excellent warrior. You have reached the double excellence admission standard for the military academy, right?" According to the technical level standard of Wesson State, a rough-level magician can cast magic of the same level as boiling water and fireballs. An ordinary-level magician can use some magic that can penetrate standard brick walls, and an excellent-level magician can kill specific ordinary monsters alone without any injury. Babo started learning magic after joining the army. To reach this level in a few years requires both talent and hard work. Babo just smiled complacently and did not answer. Metzger pretended to be enlightened and said, "I understand. You must be trying to avoid a math test." Babo's face fell, and he quickly changed the subject. "Our mission this time is to harass the enemy's outer camp. We'll prioritize dealing with the magicians. The 4 who came with me are all ordinary magicians." Metzger wasn't buying it. With a sly grin, he said, "Old squad leader, as your senior, I solemnly remind you that the math section for the military academy graduation exam is much more difficult than the entrance exam." Babo looked like he had a severe toothache. When the 2 returned to camp, the rest of the Black Cats had already packed their equipment. In addition to the usual weapons and supplies, they also brought 2 golem puppet mules for transport. "That's a great thing," Metzger said with a hint of envy. A golem mule can carry 150 kilograms of supplies at a normal walking speed, and up to 200 kilograms on firm ground. Crucially, its endurance far exceeds that of a human, making it extremely useful for mountain operations. Bobo said. Before we set out, Lord All-Might said that the design would be finalized after this battle, and then we could start mass production. Metzger shook his head and said, don't count on large-scale equipment. It's too expensive. The cavalry's puppet horses are already making the principal's heart bleed. The information I got is that it is only equipped for mountain troops and reconnaissance companies. Then he said, we have set up a lot of traps nearby. Let someone take you away later. Bobo immediately agreed. Although they can find the traps, it does not mean that they can waste energy on their own people. Metzger immediately arranged for people to slaughter cattle for lunch. Oh, woolly rhinoceros. Bobo laughed when he saw the ingredients for lunch. You are living a good life. Wool rhinoceros are widely distributed in forests and hilly areas. They are only about the size of a big fat pig. In winter, they have coarse brown hair as long as a palm, and in summer, the hair is only half of that. They have 2 horns on their noses, one long and one short. They are not big in size, but they are very strong and have great temper. Now that the river has dried up, wild animals from the downstream have come to the upstream to find water. The food for Metzger and his friends has improved all of a sudden. There is no particular requirement for eating in the wild. The hair of the woolly rhinoceros is poisonous. The fur and internal organs that may have parasites are thrown down the mountain to be slowly digested by the slime. The highly poisonous horns are wrapped and placed with a magic core dug out from the skull. The bones are used to make soup, and the meat slices are boiled in boiling water for half an hour to ensure that any parasites are cooked. Finally, the instant noodles are cooked in the bone soup and the meat slices are scooped together. Before eating, Bobo said to Metzger again, don't talk from now on. Metzger opened his mouth with a smile and was about to say something, but Bobo quickly stuffed a beef leg bone into his mouth. Everyone around knew that they were old acquaintances, and they watched the fun with a smile. Just as the silent lunch was about to end, Metzger turned to a soldier and said, Spike. Later you lead the friendly forces through the trap area and give them the prey when you find them. The traps they set were all warning traps, which were mainly used to determine whether someone passed by and then triggered them. They couldn't catch large animals, but pheasants and rabbits were no problem. The 5 people in the Black Cat Corps tried to save as much food as possible, so they gave them the prey if there was any. Bobo was so nervous that his heartbeat was disordered, and he almost couldn't hold the bowl in his hand. He breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the last sentence. It would be strange if it wasn't a big problem. No one could have imagined that the foot trap that usually only caught a hare and couldn't even catch a deer could actually catch a knight. A knight with delicate skin and flesh and gorgeous armor was trapped by his feet and tripped to the ground. He didn't wear a helmet and hid his forehead on a tree and fainted. When he was found, there were several well-fed leeches as thick as sausages on his neck. Oh, don't kill me. The knight's crying voice made Bobo and Spike, who was leading the way, feel very sick, but they still stripped the man naked and cut off more than 10 leeches from his fair and smooth skin with a dagger. They also found more than 50 blood-sucking insects on his buttocks and thighs, which were stuck to his skin like thumbtacks. He covered his belly button with one hand and curled up on the ground shivering. Spike shuddered when he saw the dense blood buttons and shook his head and said, he can only live for 3 days at most. Let's kill him quickly. The Pink Knight was so scared that he peed and shit when he heard it. Bobo pinched his nose and asked, how do you know? Spike sighed and said, my family used to be hunters, and my father taught me to recognize a lot of insects. The flood 10 years ago washed my father away, and I followed everyone to Wesson County and grew up in an orphanage. The blood buttons on his butt and legs are poisonous. You won't feel it when you're bitten at first. If you don't find it in time and dig out the bitten flesh, it will start to itch after half a day, and it will be very painful after another half a day. At this time, small insects will start to hatch in the flesh and follow the blood vessels throughout the body. Not long after a person dies, the flesh will quickly turn into very smelly pus, and the hatched small insects will eat this. Soon after, the slimes will be attracted by the stench. When they eat the pus, they will eat the insects. The insects will pupate in its cavity and come out before they break out of the pupae. After he finished speaking, Bobo, a veteran who had joined the Wesson Army since its founding and fought throughout the entire game, and who had been deployed to the east bank of the Elbe River during this period, broke out in a cold sweat. This bug was too terrible. The other 4 who had at least participated in the battle to recover Constantine were also wiping their foreheads constantly. As for the person involved, he fainted when he heard that he would soon turn into a pool of pus. Spike quickly kicked him awake, and regardless of the fact that he started crying, he asked in a cold voice, If you can answer our questions, we will give you a quick death. Are you starting to feel itchy now? The Pink Knight was stunned for a moment, and felt his thighs and buttocks begin to itch, and he cried even harder. After 2 minutes, he said, I am the close attendant of Grand Duke Regens. I ran home secretly because I was worried about my sister's illness. If you can help send my purse to my sister, I will tell you everything I know and I will give you half of the gold coins in the purse. Babo and the others nodded. The man had a hide purse containing over 20 gold coins and some silver and copper coins. Spike nodded and said, You're a poor man. I won't take that money. I'll give it all to your family. He hesitated, then added, I'll tell your family that you met me on the battlefield, gravely wounded and near death, and entrusted the purse to me. The Pink Knight was stunned for a moment, then looked up at Spike. His eyes shifted from surprise to shame, then gradually to peace, and finally to complete calm. Thank you, he said sincerely. Half an hour later, Babo had learned the enemy's patrol schedules, routes, and passwords, among other secrets. They wouldn't trust them easily and would verify them later. Afterward, Spike let Babo leave while he sent the man on his way. After the others had left, Spike's face suddenly darkened, and he said coldly, Sunflower. The Pink Knight shook his head and smiled, saying, I didn't expect you to actually escape. His hand, which had been covering his lower abdomen, loosened. There was a gray floral tattoo the size of a fingernail below his belly button, which was invisible if you didn't pay attention. Spike nodded slightly and said, You killed my brother for the sake of cornflowers. There is no turning back on this vengeance. Don't worry, I won't let her bear this vengeance. I know very well who the real enemy is. The other party nodded. Thank you. I think this money is enough to rescue her, Spike said solemnly. I will take her to Wessenland and let her live a new life. You can give her a new name. The forest became quiet, with only the sound of birds. Rose, this is the flower she really likes. The next moment, the smell of blood filled the woods. More than 10 minutes later, Spike caught up with Babo and his group as if nothing had happened. Babo asked him nervously, How do we prevent that kind of insect? They were going to be active in this forest for a long time, and dying on the battlefield would be a worthy death. No one wanted to be turned into pus by little bugs, Spike said calmly. I lied to him. It's okay to itch. Smear it with mud or oil or something to prevent the bugs from breathing, and they'll go away. Chapter 352 Adding materials to the well. Wheel, door, stupid. Door was yesterday's command. What's today's command? Whip. Isn't whip tomorrow's? Isn't rains tomorrow's? Babo, lying in ambush in the bushes, wanted to beat up the two men and tell them that tonight's command was rains and whip. Now he completely understood why the commander demanded that all soldiers, including the city defense troops and militia, be educated. Learning and thinking are to the brain like dumbbells to muscles. If you're not smart enough to remember commands, let alone achieve success, you deserve to be beaten to death in Wessen's army for giving the wrong command. Commands are carefully chosen, taking into account the user's level. They must be familiar to the user in order to remember them, otherwise they will forget them in a blink of an eye. The coalition's commands took this into account. The commands for the past few days were from the carriage, and the reins and whip were both ropes, the wheels and axles were integrated, and the doors and windows were not to mention, making them very easy to remember. The two patrol teams tonight were farmers armed with pitchforks. While rote memorization might be fine for pairings, remembering which wasn't a problem on a given day was a major flaw. People who don't use their brains often have a major flaw. The moment they realize they're wrong, they immediately fall into self-denial. They're unsure whether what they've memorized is correct, leaving their minds completely muddled. What frustrated Babo was that, normally, the two patrol teams would continue their patrols after meeting, but this group seemed to think the night was beautiful and sat down on the grass about 10 meters away to slack off. It wasn't that he was afraid of being discovered, but the distance was close enough. If those guys needed to urinate or defecate, they'd most likely run over here. A hit near him, or even on his head, would be disastrous. Half an hour later, sporadic explosions echoed in the distant night sky, then quickly quieted down. The lazy patrol team wasn't the least bit nervous, but rather relieved. The Wessen Army's routine night raid was over. As long as they weren't the ones getting hit, everyone was relieved. So, it was time to get out the dice and cards. Soon, several soldiers in formal uniforms descended from the mountaintop barracks. Babo expected them to beat up the gambling patrol, but instead, they joined in and even became the banker. The group was preoccupied with dice and card games, and Babo easily slipped past a torchlight, not even disturbing the snoring sentries. The patrol system established by Grand Duke Franconia and Grand Duke Regens was sound, but the quality of its implementation was questionable, especially among the cannon fodder in the outer barracks. Even a perfect system can be riddled with loopholes. The riverbed was now covered in thick silt. Numerous wells had been dug along the riverbank. Initially, there was clear water, but precipitation in the riverbed caused the water level to drop rapidly, making it difficult to draw water. Wells are life, and the leaders knew they needed to deploy troops to protect them. However, they had no idea how the orders would translate through the ranks. Babo crept to the wells, pulled a bottle from his pocket, filled it with capsules, and dropped one into each well. The 5 wells here had been filled, but there were still a few more over 200 meters away. There were only torches and no human figures there. Since there were still plenty of capsules, he decided to throw them in a few more. He thought so, and so did the others. Over an hour later, a shadowy figure arrived at the 5 wells again, throwing capsules. The capsules sank to the bottom of the wells, gradually dissolving, the dark brown crystals inside quickly dissolving in the water, leaving no trace. Monkey, X-eyed, the commands were correct, and Babo returned safely to camp. He brewed hot tea on the stove, sheltered from light and smoke. A soldier resting nearby poured him a cup. One of the 5 men kept watch, while another, carrying a communicator, climbed to the top of a tree in the dark to report Babo's progress. Babo sat by the stove, talking with the 2 men. Babo asked them, "What were you talking about just now? Why are you laughing so horribly?" One soldier pointed to a comrade next to him named Apachus and said, "He's made a new discovery." Apachus, with dark hair and brown eyes, was from Constantinople. His parents were chefs at the Imperial University. 10 years ago, the family followed Manuel and his family to Wessenland, where they resumed their profession at Wessenberg University. Apachus grew up in this school, enjoying exceptional learning opportunities, but his talent was limited. Although he scored highly on the written exams, no matter how hard he tried, he could only reach the level of an ordinary magician. After graduating from Wessenberg University, he traveled north for 2 years, bringing home the daughter of a minor noble family from the Dark Lands. To support his family, he joined the army and was later selected for the Black Cat Corps due to his quick wit and extensive knowledge. He often boasted about how he rescued an old knight from the clutches of white bears 2 stories tall in the Dark Land, and how the knight's granddaughter, despite religious constraints, fell in love with him at first sight, and how, moved by his passion, she followed custom and went to the seashore to capture 2 flightless birds with black backs and white bellies to propose marriage. Tonight was no exception, but he was recounting events from the day before. Apachus said mysteriously, "Captain, that effeminate knight we met yesterday, I suspect he was a pedophile." Babo had never heard of the word pedophile, so after asking, he immediately shifted his seat to move away from him. Apachus said hurriedly, "Captain, I know this doesn't mean I did it, you may not know, but many nobles will raise good-looking children as pets from a young age. If they grow up and look good, they'll have sex with them. If they still look good when they grow beards, they'll keep theirs. If they're not good-looking, they'll throw them away and get new ones. Also, some people will specifically look for good-looking children to train and cultivate, and then sell them to nobles who like them. You don't know, when I was in Constantinople, some students also brought children like that. Yesterday, that guy was so scared that he pooped. His poop was much thicker than others. You can tell he's been using it since he was a kid." Babo's face was very dark, and he said in a deep voice, "You observe very carefully. Starting tomorrow, the observation mission will be yours." Apachus's face fell and he said hurriedly, "Captain, I'm a sniper, not an observer." Babo said seriously, "Everyone here is a sniper. We just have different divisions of labor for the final victory. We obey orders." Apachus was helpless and could only say, "I hope the south wind doesn't blow tomorrow." Someone nearby immediately said, "Don't expect the north wind to blow at this time of year." Summer had arrived, and the south wind, having swept away the moisture from the White Mountains, was blowing into this land. A change of direction would have to wait until autumn. Apachus said dejectedly, "Who came up with this idea? It's too much." Chapter 353 Life is probably over. At dawn, shouts of curses and cracks of whips rang out from the barracks, forcing the peasants to rise from their straw and rags and begin their daily work. The first thing to do at daybreak was fetch water. The well was at the foot of the mountain, and the barracks were located higher up. The masters slept until the sun had fully risen, so naturally, this work fell to the conscripted peasants. Yawning and rubbing their eyes, they each collected 2 buckets of water, using the peach blossom stone sticks that had become popular in the past 2 years. They then descended the mountain to fetch water. The water level in the well was lower this morning than yesterday, making the water draw slower. The soldiers supervising the peasants shouted curses and occasionally struck the peasants with whips. As Apicius arrived at the observation post to relieve Popo, smoke began to rise from the barracks of about 3,000 men ahead. Dried beans, bread chopped with axes, and boiled with water from the well, then a few grains of gray-black salt, formed the peasants' breakfast and dinner. As the sun leaped over the mountain tops, the Grand Duke of Franconia completed his morning exercises on a silk quilt. Another mistress helped him into his sturdy yet comfortable armor. The fateful day began. When his adjutant arrived, the Grand Duke declared, "Even the peasants have been eating sausages for 3 days straight. They're strong enough. If anyone messes up today, I'll tear him apart." The adjutant immediately bent over and replied, "So far, everything is going according to plan. The Wesson troops are unaware we're launching an attack today. All troops will assemble after breakfast and depart at 11 a.m. The battle is scheduled to begin at 4 a.m. The Grand Duke of Franconia waved him off, donned his tin can, and then headed to the meeting tent. Soon, Grand Duke Legends arrived, looking grim. Other leading nobles followed suit, and attendants quickly served them a plate full of boiled sausages. Freshly baked bread soaked up the grease, and the wine glasses were covered in water droplets. Grand Duke Franken smiled and joked with his ally, "Has your puppy not been found yet? Was it dragged into someone's tent and hidden?" Then he said to his vassals in a seemingly stern tone, "If any of you have hidden the Grand Duke's things, return them quickly." Grand Duke Regens was too lazy to respond and said calmly, "It's okay, whoever finds it will be given it to, and I will just buy a new one. I will be responsible for opening the gate today, and it will be up to you from now on." When it came to business, Grand Duke Franken became serious. While eating sausages, he said, "Wesson is still too naive. He always thought that we would be trapped here to death according to his plan. He never thought that we would take the initiative to fight out. Don't worry, as long as your mountain infantry can open a passage, my people can rush to the city of Nuremberg." Grand Duke Regens said confidently, "Don't you know very well how my mountain infantry is? The 2 countries had fought for several years before, so they naturally knew each other's strength very well. The nobles sitting on both sides of the tent had also fought each other many times, and those who were defeated and carried away prisoners were also redeemed decently. Generally speaking, there was no deep hatred." Grand Duke Franconia told his vassal, "The key to our operation this time is surprise. Once the passage is open, we must march overnight and follow the route all the way to Nuremberg. The key to this battle is to capture the river port before Wesson reacts and build a pontoon bridge across the river. Don't worry about supplies, we'll resupply them in Wesson territory once we're across the river." Finally, he turned to Grand Duke Regens and said, "The Wesson army will undoubtedly pursue us from behind. I'll need you to hold them off." Grand Duke Regens put down his glass and said, "Don't worry. If they dare to pursue, I'll ambush them along the way. I expect it will be dark by then, and their weapons won't be that effective." Many now attribute Frederick's military victories to advanced weaponry, which gave ordinary people the offensive power of magicians. Therefore, how to prevent a Wesson army from unleashing its might became a challenge for their neighbors. Ambush was the most preferred tactic, as it allowed them to close the distance and prevent the enemy from deploying their own weapons. Such details had already been finalized, but the Wesson army, with its reputation, needed to be encouraged. However, the stench of feces permeated the tents, interrupting the mobilization meeting. Frederick's greatest fear during war was indiscriminate plague. After his reputation gained renown, he had the army publish a military disease prevention regulations for public sale to prevent the crowded barracks from becoming a source of disease. The military disease prevention regulations prioritized the provision of latrines over clean water, demonstrating their utmost importance. The Archduke of Franconia had not read the book. Camp planning was not his responsibility. His adjutant, who was in charge of the detailed work, had studied it and explained its general outline, giving him a general idea. Latrines were now located outside the camps. A pit was dug in the ground, with a log placed beside it. With their thighs resting on the log and their buttocks dangling, they could defecate into the pit. When one pit was nearly full, it was filled and a new one dug. Open urination and defecation were prohibited in the barracks, Anyone caught doing so would be punished with flogging the tools used. The Archduke of Franconia's expression was grim, and he signaled his adjutant to go out and ambush the men. The lieutenant had just reached the tent door and drawn back the curtain when a knight in half armor and a tunic suddenly rushed in, nervously reporting, "Sir, plague has broken out in several camps." The tent fell silent, the first sound being the chatter of teeth shivering. Frederick's tactic was simple: throw some laxatives into the enemy's well, driving the magicians out to the latrine. Then, when they were caught off guard, sniper bullets would arrive. Who would wear heavy armor and cast a magical shield while spraying? Even if it failed, it would at least dampen enemy morale. Frederick proposed a plan, which the general staff deemed feasible and assigned to the Black Hats, a special operations unit. Upon hearing the principal was planning to use drugs on the battlefield, a poison specialist whipped out a laxative, claiming just a single gram could dehydrate an elephant, and added a muscle-paralyzing agent. Fearing a potential safety issue, the Black Cats increased the dosage when issuing the mission. During Bobo's mission, a lack of communication between the various squads led to duplicate doses of the drug in some wells. The end result was that those infected, like those afflicted with a plague like cholera, lost control of their sphincters and could not stop. The strong could hold back and run to the toilet, but the weak were simply controlled by their bodies. The soldiers woke up late to eat, but what was coming came, and then came the knights and magicians. To jostle for position, they threw those in the middle of spraying to the side, even kicking them into pits. Snipers, lurking in the distance, faithfully followed orders. Seeing a well-dressed individual sitting on a wooden bar with their pants removed, they immediately took aim and fired. Bobo saw his target through the scope shutter. The bullet, too far away, probably missed the torso. He staggered and fell into the pit. Those lined up before the wooden bar jumped in shock. Before they could react, more bullets flew in from afar, piercing the torsos. The stench overwhelmed the scent of blood. Frederick, in neither his past nor present life, had ever experienced a plague that wiped out 9 out of 10 houses. He had misjudged the public's fear of the plague. Normally, those infected would be well by tomorrow after clearing their bowels, and back to normal the day after. But the public's fear of the plague denied them time for careful investigation. Most people suffered from diarrhea, and some died on the spot. Panic spread through the camp, and few cared much about the causes of death. The lords drank wine today, not well water, but sausages cooked in water, so the effect was slow. The Archduke of Franconia forced himself to remain calm and immediately dispatched personnel to investigate. Just then, something unexpected happened. Grand Duke Regens was a powerful man, the second oldest child in his family. As a young man, he won the Knights tournament in Wayne, the capital of the Osmogan Empire, earning him the favor of Emperor Ferdinand. With the help of the Osmogan Empire, he inherited his father's title. However, his frequent comings and goings over the years had long since become less than ordinary. If you were to take off his shit now, his life would probably be over. Right, make a loud noise to cover it up. Chapter 354 Chaos. Grand Duke Regens's cry set off a flurry of reactions. Guards outside the tent, believing him to be under attack, rushed in with swords drawn. The Grand Duke of Franconia's guards, interpreting it as a signal for an assassination attempt on their master, attacked without hesitation. Inside the tent, Grand Duke Regens's vassals saw several of their own guards slain in a flash. Since they were on Franconia's soil, they instinctively assumed the enemy was out to kill them, and so they drew their weapons and charged the Franconia crowd. The Franconia crowd, similarly, believed they were being targeted. They had just fought a war for several years, and now they had come all the way to help. Their unsolicited kindness was either treacherous or deceitful. They were undoubtedly bribed by the Duke of Wesson. Had the two Grand Dukes intervened, there might have been a chance, but they were becoming increasingly suspicious. The Grand Duke of Franconia shared his vassals' sentiments, but the overpowering Wesson forced him to suppress them. But what if Grand Duke Regens and the Duke of Wesson were colluding to plot against him? The more he thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Grand Duke Regens had married a woman from the Osmoga Empire, and he had the Empire as his backing. And Duke Wesson had close ties with the Osmoga Empire. Princess Marie, who had transcended the struggle for the succession to the throne, had even fled to Constantine with him, meaning the two sides had a way to unite. It all made sense, and Grand Duke Franken figured it out. No wonder Duke Wesson, known for his aggressive attacks, had only surrounded him. He was waiting for Grand Duke Regens to join forces. Grand Duke Regens felt a little apprehensive. It turned out that Grand Duke Franken was planning to attack him. It seemed his pet had disappeared because they had captured and tortured him. The thought of his beloved pet, now bruised and bloodied, leaving him livid, and he lost the warmth in his pants. Grand Duke Regens came to terms with this. With the old emperor of the Osmigan Empire now bedridden and nearing death, the struggle for the throne among the princes and princesses entered its final stages. Grand Duke Franken supported the 8th prince, a rival to his own 4th prince. The relationship between Duke Wessenland and the 8th prince's sister, Princess Marie, was well known. Although Marie wasn't involved in the succession dispute, as siblings, it was natural for them to serve as liaisons. Grand Duke Regens ultimately determined that the 8th prince of the Osmigan Empire was behind this war, orchestrating a plot by Grand Duke Franken and Duke Wessenland to lure him out of his territory and eliminate him. It seemed the previous killing of the magic god Bor on his side and the surrender of the 3 sword masters on Grand Duke Franken's side were problematic. The promise of a 10-day massacre in Nuremberg as compensation was merely a smokescreen to weaken his power and wait for today's action. The two dukes became increasingly convinced of their own righteousness, and their fragile alliance crumbled. Near the Allied camp, Bobo and his men immediately reported the chaos in the enemy camp, and the news quickly reached headquarters. Chief of Staff Helmut hesitated, unsure whether the enemy was in complete chaos, controlled disarray, or even a conspiracy. As commander, Franz Jr. immediately issued orders. The main forces on the main road will immediately launch an attack with light equipment. Advance the attack, attacking from both front and back. The surrounding blockade forces will closely monitor the roads. Only unarmed civilians will be allowed to leave, nobles will be killed or captured. Move the air force and carpet bomb the enemy camp. The sudden shift in the battlefield situation put a heavy test on the skill and quality of commanders and soldiers, especially when the original plan for a tight defense suddenly turned into an active offensive. The transition between static and dynamic was not as simple as selecting a target with a mouse and clicking on it. On the main road north of the Allied camp, there was a brigade commanded by Baron that was interspersed with the main force. He and his 2 commanders, Michael and Miroslav, were all second-generation knights who grew up with Frederick. Their staff officer was Eugene, who had joined the Western Army only last year and was still a cadet at the military academy. After receiving the order, Baron looked at the map and thought carefully for a few minutes. Without looking up, he asked Eugene, "How long will it take us to prepare for the counterattack plan?" Eugene replied immediately, "After the order is given, the cavalry company can set off first in 10 minutes. The 2 rapid reaction companies will set off lightly on bicycles at the 30th minute. The follow-up troops can set off in horse-drawn carriages at the 45th minute, followed by artillery and baggage trains." "Okay," Baron made up his mind quickly. "Eugene, you will stay in the camp with 500 people and pay attention to the movements in Belo City. If the principal needs help, go to support him immediately. Miroslav, you will take the cavalry company and the rapid reaction company and go ahead. You must reach the battlefield as quickly as possible and at least put pressure on the enemy. Michael, you will take the infantry and move by car. After arriving at the battlefield, you must first capture a commanding height. The artillery and I will be there soon and set up artillery positions on the commanding heights." The order was quickly disseminated. The cavalry, the counter-charge force, had already been with their horses and immediately mounted their horses upon receiving the order. The rapid reaction squad, equipped with numerous bicycles and tricycles, was a light infantry unit dedicated to road firefighting, leak repairs, and rapid maneuvering. Off the roads, unable to ride their bikes, they became ordinary infantry. As firefighters, they had already loaded their vehicles with weapons and equipment, and quickly set off, following behind the cavalry. The infantry and artillery, already in defensive positions, needed time to prepare and load their vehicles, so they had to depart last. The detailed and thorough preparations and extensive training played a crucial role at this moment. The entire camping positions were busy and calm, executing the attack on schedule. Meanwhile, Metzger was listening to Hasenpraz's explanation of how to push down roadside trees to stop the caravan and seize its carriages when the latest order from headquarters arrived: secure all roads. Allow unarmed civilians to pass. Nobles to be shot or captured. The 2 exchanged bewildered glances. Was the main force launching a general attack ahead of time, and were they simply intercepting the fleeing enemy? Metzger and Hasenpraz consulted and immediately advanced 6 kilometers, concentrating their forces on setting up a checkpoint at the intersection where the mountain roads converged. This intersection was within range of enemy cavalry, so they hadn't considered it. Since they were gathering the fleeing troops, they could be bold. Metzger, leading the regular troops lightly, advanced first, reaching the designated position in less than half an hour. Hasenpratz arrived an hour later with a militia and supplies. A simple checkpoint had been constructed from felled trees, manned by several soldiers with rifles. Gatling guns were hidden on the hill behind, stopping dozens of fleeing farmers. The Wesson soldiers, wearing gas masks, were so intimidating that the farmers were paralyzed and unable to communicate. Fortunately, Hoffman arrived and spoke to the farmers in a local accent, quickly gathering a wealth of surprising intelligence. Grand Duke Franken and Grand Duke Regens were fighting. Grand Duke Regens was killed. Grand Duke Franken ordered a plague to use everyone's lives to summon an evil god. Grand Duke Regens was tortured to death and screamed loudly before dying. More and more farmers and soldiers appeared on the road, bringing a variety of news, including one about Grand Duke Franken attempting to rape Grand Duke Regens. Metzger ordered them to leave their weapons behind and depart. The farmers were fine. They had nothing but a few rags of clothing and blankets and a peach-shaped stone stick. Metzger told them to leave the spearheads stuck on the sticks and leave. One soldier wanted to keep his sword, but Metzger nodded. Spike shot the man in the head and left him hanging by the side of the road. The soldiers behind him obeyed. Soon after, a dozen cavalrymen came running up, led by a knight. Metzger ordered them to halt, but the cavalrymen charged instead, only to be shot into briquettes by the P-shaped Gatling guns behind them, leaving them hanging upside down from the trees. The nobles who arrived later became more docile, especially after learning that the man standing before them was the infamous Emperor Killer Metzger. They simply demanded respectful treatment, as per tradition. Hoffman boiled water and made tea before the checkpoint, and everyone sat on the ground, chatting and chatting. When they needed to relieve themselves, they would go to the newly dug latrine nearby. It seemed so pleasant that some unsuspecting nobles, mistaking it for a rally point, dismounted and joined, ultimately becoming prisoners. This incident was later adapted into the play Hoffman Captures the Baron with a Cup of Tea, which has been passed down into the space age. Meanwhile, Frederick had just woken up. Last night, this was a city in the Duchy of Franconia, now a new territory of the Canton of Wesson. Chapter 355 Who is in favor and who is against? Balo is an ordinary city in the Duchy of Franconia, where the lives of ordinary peddlers and hawkers are commonplace. The struggle for power between a few entrenched local families and the city lords, sent by the Grand Duke of Franconia, is a common occurrence in this land. However, with a recent outbreak of war, the army is not far away, and the city has become a vital logistics base. The Grand Duke of Franconia has sent the loyal old knight Quant to garrison the city. The city's dignitaries, feeling their swords were stronger, unanimously chose to maintain peace, lest the Grand Duke of Franconia snap them in a rage. Although the main force ahead was surrounded, the apparent disparity in strength between the two sides led everyone to believe that the Grand Duke of Franconia would ultimately prevail, so they continued to drink and dance. The knight Quant, who oversaw military affairs, was unsympathetically devoted to his duties, never attending a single reception or dance. While the local nobles were somewhat displeased at being unable to help with the expiring food in the army warehouses, they still expressed their praise. Soon after, news arrived. Knight Quant's wife, Mats, had arrived. Upon closer inspection, it turned out Mats came from a merchant family. The men, who had long coveted the warehouse, suddenly understood. Quant, who had been living in the barracks, saw Mats in his tent and asked sternly, "What are you doing here?" There was no real emotional connection between the couple, but they maintained a facade of affection, a common practice among aristocratic marriages. According to tradition, while the husband was away at war, the wife was to remain at home in prayer, not leaving the house. To do so was considered infidelity, or on the verge of infidelity. While this was said, in reality, it was merely a hostage, meant to woo a gigolo. Mats's presence was a serious violation of tradition, and Quant didn't want to tarnish his reputation. For Herbert, Mats calmly said, naming their eldest son, "I'll live a long time, and after you die, I'll be counting on him." Quant's expression softened considerably. Herbert, his eldest son, was a rather ordinary man, currently guarding the gates of the Grand Duke of Franconia's castle, a hostage, indeed. Mats continued, "Herbert isn't married yet. You could take advantage of your station here to find him a wife. He's not capable. You could find him a wife whose family has some ability." Quant sat in his chair, head bowed, silent for a long time. He knew that his abilities, aside from loyalty, were mediocre, and his son was a simple, untalented individual. The Grand Duke of Franconia needed him now, so he offered him the chance to sacrifice his life for his son's future. Now that this hurdle was over, what about the future? Okay, Quant sighed. You decide. Mats left the barracks and found a decent hotel in Barrow, where he got busy. First up was the ladies' circle. After hinting at the salon, Mats gave the local families a satisfactory answer. Carts were coming in and out of the barracks, and the total amount of military rations had increased slightly, not decreased. However, the civilians wouldn't even eat the beans these days. This was the first time Quant had to do something like this, as he couldn't move his hands freely, otherwise, the mice would go for a stroll after they had eaten their fill. With his wife's help, Quant's reputation grew, and his son's marriage seemed almost certain. Let me host the banquet, Quant, somewhat displeased with Mats's new suggestion, said gravely. Drinking will delay things, Mats replied. Herbert's marriage has progressed, and you may need to make the final decision, Quant instructed. Don't prepare strong wine for me. Mats borrowed a house of a small merchant with whom he was interested in a marriage and personally organized the banquet, inviting every prominent figure in Balo, from the mayor to officials to wealthy merchants. Everything was handled with such impeccable organization that amazed outsiders. On the evening that Babbo and his companions went to add fuel to the well, the dining room of the mansion was filled with clinking glasses, laughter, and cheers as people toasted to the health of the Grand Duke of Franconia and Knight Quant. Quant, previously a marginal figure, felt a little awkward at his first seat at the head of such a lavish banquet. His heart was bleeding. He knew the cost of tonight's banquet would be substantial. Was such extravagance necessary? Even Hoffman wouldn't easily throw a feast like this, complete with a roasted whole pig, a whole lamb, and a whole roasted calf, all served with wines aged over 10 years. The Lord of Barrow and Quant were of the same generation, having fought side by side in their youth. However, Quant's martial prowess was inferior to that of a knight, often absent due to serious injuries. He hadn't made any significant contributions, unlike Quant, who had become the Grand Duke's trusted confidant and ruler of the city. He was now too fat to ride a horse or wield a sword, but with his son and grandson serving under the Grand Duke, it wouldn't be a problem for them to succeed him. Although they had known each other for years, they weren't close friends. This didn't stop the lord from feasting lavishly and speaking favorably for Quant's future in-laws. Quant's son's marriage was practically settled. The merchant family had promised a generous dowry, and the daughter was of average quality, nothing to complain about. Just as the celebration of victory and unity was drawing to a close, the dining room door flung open. Frederick, dressed in a black, double-breasted trench coat with silver buttons and seemingly unarmed, closed the door and pulled a chair behind it, taking a seat at the other end of the long table. Quant assumed he was from Barrow, while the Barrow lord assumed he was from Quant. Both sides simultaneously asked, "Who is he?" Frederick glanced around the table and smiled. Without Mats's help, gathering the city's leaders would have been a challenge. "I am Frederick von Wessen," he said casually. "I now declare the city my capture." "Who is for? Who is against?" Everyone present suddenly lost their drunkenness, several slumping from their chairs to the bottom of the table and snoring. The lord of the city, standing at a table, tried to stand up and rebuke Frederick, but he felt dizzy and dazed. Quant, however, reacted more quickly, drawing his sword as he stood. Bang! Bang! Frederick wasted no time in exchanging words. He pulled his revolver from beneath his trench coat and shot each one. The restaurant suddenly filled with a stench of blood and urine. He carefully wiped his revolver with a clean white handkerchief and asked calmly, "Anyone else?" No one dared to speak, their breathing becoming lighter. The maids huddled in the corner, covering their mouths and trembling. After 2 minutes, Frederick put away his handkerchief and said with a smile, "Since you all disagree, it's not my fault." As soon as he finished speaking, the restaurant door flung open again, and in rushed a group of soldiers from the Duke's Guard, dressed in black uniforms, wearing gas masks and armed with pea-shooters. Their actions were so swift and decisive that the people on either side of the table collapsed in a pool of blood before they could even finish their "I agree." Chapter 356 An unexpected event from outside. Fatty was certain he was the Ghazi emperor who enjoyed the most diverse cuisine. Ever since the opening of the Carolina Canal, merchants from all over the world have flocked to Wissenberg. They established permanent chambers of commerce there, and many have settled there. Psyche, president of the Wesen Scientific Society, rented the riverside land outside Wesenberg from Frederick for 200 years, formerly occupied by a blacksmith shop and mill. She built a row of houses along the river with her own money and then rented them out to merchants from other regions to open restaurants, effectively free of charge. Shop rents are rising annually across Wesen, and while free space is sought after, it's not always available. Shops here can only be used as restaurants, serving local specialties. They must pass Psyche's food tasting before being rented, and the interior decoration must reflect the local style. In less than 3 years, the area has become a hub for regional delicacies, attracting a large number of merchants and tourists. Fada has quickly mastered the art of eating and drinking on the entire street, and recently has been frequenting a restaurant owned by a merchant from Hibernia. Hibernia, located west of the Kingdom of Anglia, covers approximately 90,000 square kilometers. Today, nearly 20% of the northern portion has been occupied by the kingdom, which is also infiltrating several kingdoms in the central and southern regions. The owner of this restaurant was once a prominent local noble. After the king fell under the control of the Kingdom of Anglia and suffered a crushing defeat in the political struggle, his family fled to the city of Wesenborg, eventually leaving their cook and servants to open the restaurant. Fada loves the food and has become friends with the owner after visiting several times. Today's dinner was hosted by a friend, Quill Penn, military strategist, a reporter for the White Stork Times, who wanted to interview Fada about the sudden change in the war situation. During the day, the battlefield deviated from the previous day's minor skirmishes to a series of major news stories. First, last night, Duke Wesen personally led his guards to capture the city of Barrow, killing nearly 100 officials, officers, and wealthy merchants who dared to resist and seizing countless supplies. Then, this morning, news arrived from the front that the Wesen army launched a full-scale attack on the combined forces of the Duchy of Franconia and the Legends League, causing a large number of enemy troops to flee. At noon, the Wesen state government suddenly issued an ultimatum to all towns in both countries, demanding unconditional surrender within 5 days or face expulsion of all officials and their families. Furthermore, cities that surrendered would be exempt from tax for 1 year, or half tax for 2 years. The afternoon's news was even more devastating. Following Richardner's friendly persuasion, the entire garrison of Marienburg, the capital of the Franconia Duchy, revolted. Simultaneously, the armies of the Duchies of Mainz and Bavaria began invading the Franconia Duchy and the Regens Union, respectively. Those listening to the radio were still buzzing with discussion when, with incredible speed, an unexpected military order was issued. A state of emergency was declared in the state of Wesen, a second wave of militia was called up, and a curfew was in effect starting at 11 p.m. tonight. This day's news was more than the previous months, leaving many baffled. Why had the Duke of Wesen suddenly taken such action? Hadn't they agreed to take their time to process the news? The news of the complete massacre of the high-ranking officials in Belo City struck many as a departure from his usual style. While one couldn't ask the people involved, there was a professional who could. Before the main course arrived, Fada sampled Hibernia's unique black pudding, made primarily with cow's blood, milk, and salt, thickened with fat thickened with breadcrumbs, giving it a gelatinous texture. "This question is very complicated," he said as he ate. "I can only make some guesses, which may or may not be correct. Anyone who has fought in a war knows that a war is often disrupted by unexpected factors. Like last year, when I launched the war against the Kingdom of Kush, victory was certain, but no one expected Duke Wesen to suddenly appear and join, ultimately leading to my defeat. I suspect this change in the war's course was due to an unexpected event we were unaware of, one that would affect the course of the war and prompt Wesen to accelerate his efforts." The main course arrived, a traditional Hibernian stew, made with beef, onions, bacon, stock, beer, and vegetables like carrots and celery, simmered over low heat. It was seasoned with bay leaves, thyme, salt, garlic, and black pepper. The addition of red eggplant and Elizabethan potatoes, a groundbreaking addition since arriving in Wesen, further enhanced the flavor. The staple food is soda bread made of flour, salt, baking soda and cheese. Olive oil and eggs are added to Fada's preferences. It is now called Emperor's bread by the owner. After taking a sip of dark beer with the aroma of roasted wheat, Fada continued, "Friends who have been emperors all know that threats come from both inside and outside. The biggest internal threats are struggles for power, natural disasters, famine, and plague. There have been no extremely serious natural disasters so far, The weather has been good, and there has been no plague. After taking a bite of the beef stew, he said, there is no question of famine. What I envy most is the granary in Wesson State, which is full of grain. According to my estimation, based on the standard of basic hunger, that grain can feed the entire Wesson State for 2 years, and if they survive, they can eat for 3 years. Friends who have been emperors all know that if you have food, you have everything. I'm so envious. After taking a sip of dark beer, Fata said, there is no one in Wesson State who can threaten Wesson's status, no brothers and sisters who want to compete for the right of inheritance, no children who can't wait to succeed to the throne, and no subordinates whose merits are too great to be rewarded, so there is no need to worry about this. From this we can see that sudden accidents do not come from within, but from outside. The reporter hosting the dinner was also well informed. As he ate soda bread drenched in stew gravy, he mused, I haven't heard of any famine, war, or anything like that happening outside lately. With his income, even a meal here would have been a painful experience. Today's interview was official business, and the newspaper was covering the expenses, so he enjoyed the meal comfortably. Fata shook his head slightly and said, those of us in high positions have our own intelligence systems, allowing us to obtain information unknown to outsiders. The reporter nodded. That made sense. Rumors circulated that Duke Wesson had an intelligence organization, but no one knew the details. Fata ate as he spoke. Although some things haven't been made public, we can infer them from the details. Think about it. What external events have been unusual in the past 2 days? We can limit the scope, starting with the Duchy of Mainz, the Duchy of Bavaria, and yes, the Osmag Empire. The reporter thought for a moment, apologized, and went outside to ask his assistant to return to the newspaper immediately to inquire about any unusual news. Fata's favorite dessert wine was the restaurant's triple distilled spirit, blended with cream, vanilla, and, more recently, caramel, for a unique flavor. He sipped his wine slowly, listening to the latest news his assistant brought back. Over the past 2 days, tourists from the Osmaga Empire had been leaving in a hurry, some even paying a large sum to charter a boat. Alice, Fata sighed after listening, I guess that His Excellency Ferdinand, the Emperor of the Osmaga Empire, is dying. Friends who have been emperors know that the first thing a new emperor has to do after ascending the throne is to control the entire government. There are many ways to do this, including launching wars and making secret plans. What will follow is that foreign policy may change, or it may remain the same, but we must know the heir to the throne to make further judgments. The Osmaga Empire has not yet designated a crown prince, so their future foreign policy cannot be judged. I think Wesson has a secret agreement with Ferdinand on the issues of the Duchy of Franconia and the Regents Alliance. Before I came here, I already knew that these two countries had been under the control of the Osmaga Empire. Wesson cannot avoid this point if he wants to annex them. Secret agreements are different for different people. The makers of the agreements can deny their obligations while they are alive, but they can't prove anything when they are dead. I guess Wesson got bad news about Ferdinand, so he hurried to end this war. After Fata finished speaking, he took another sip of wine, looking very confident. The reporter nodded repeatedly. This speculation made perfect sense, and since it involved the privacy of a neighboring country, it was sure to be a major news story. Frederick only saw the White Stork Times interview with Fata after he had defeated the encircled coalition forces. He nodded in agreement. Ferdinand, Emperor of the Osmag Empire, had been in a coma for over 7 days and was unlikely to regain consciousness. Chapter 357 Night Attack. Artillery battery, 5 rapid-fire rounds, ready to fire, Heinz commanded, and 6 75mm caliber goldenrod cannons unleashed a barrage of fireballs. Under the night sky, a volcano erupted above a military camp perched atop a hill about 2 kilometers away. Grand Duke Regen's mage regiment struggled to maintain their magical shield, uncertain when it would end. This was the camp of the Regents Alliance's mountain infantry, where the mage regiment was also stationed. Grand Duke Regens had fled here with his men after the fierce battle and was gathering his forces. Grand Duke Regens, having changed his pants, sat on a wooden barrel while someone stitched up his back wound while he listened to a briefing. Wounds heal quickly with healing, but they need to be cleaned first. However, they take time to heal, and strenuous exercise on the battlefield requires stitches and reinforcements. The hook-like curved needles pierced his flesh, but the pain was even greater after hearing his men's reports. After a day of chaos and flight, fewer than 5,000 men remained in the camp. Several thousand regular soldiers might have gathered in other camps, But then the Wesson cavalry suddenly arrived, slaughtering everyone outside and sending them fleeing with their pants held up. Grand Duke Regens looked up at the flashes of exploding shells on the city-level magic shield, his heart pounding. The magic crystals they had brought were nearly depleted, and the mages of the Mage Corps were exhausted, yet the Wesson artillery shells rained down like they were free. The Strategic Deception Bureau, a shadowy organization in Wesson State personally managed by Frederick, had repeatedly published articles in the military edition of the Wesson Daily and the publicly available Military World magazine suggesting that the price of these artillery shells was comparable to their weight in gold. Many believed that these long-range weapons were rare. Grand Duke Regens shared this belief, but the explosions had not ceased since noon, and this time they were more numerous and more intense than before. The magic shield was rapidly dimming. From his commanding hilltop, Heinz quietly observed the opposing camp with binoculars. The enemy's magic shield triggered the fuses of their artillery shells, dimming to near invisibility after a burst of rapid fire, then slowly regaining its strength after the bombardment ceased. He counted the seconds silently in his mind. The enemy's magic shield was regenerating much more slowly than before. 8 years had passed since the initial victory in the 6 days' defense, and they had fought and won numerous major battles. Much of the glory had been centered on Frederick. The growth of the younger generation of knights seemed much more obscured in this light, and few outsiders paid much attention. Everyone was growing and developing their own command styles. A few kilometers away, Baron's troops had repelled an attack organized by the Archduke of Franconia that afternoon, trapping them in a barracks that had been used to shield a main camp and then encircling them with trenches. He summoned officers above the rank of company commander and began planning tonight's offensive, urging each platoon to coordinate closely, like the gears in a pocket watch, to maximize their combat effectiveness. Heinz simply instructed the regimental commanders on the direction of attack, possible scenarios, and responses, leaving the commanders to handle the specifics. His sole responsibility was to issue the right orders at the right time. The infantry and cavalry of his brigade were already deployed outside the Duchy of Regens's military camp, awaiting the commander's attack. Heinz, however, waited for a long time before issuing any orders. The unpleasant smell outside was unpleasant, so everyone could only endure it. Heinz ordered the artillery company to fire its 6 guns in rotation after 2 minutes, bombarding the enemy's shield at a rate of 1 shot every 10 seconds. The greatest threat within the enemy camp lay with a nearly 100-man mage regiment, sheltered in the center. If they couldn't be eliminated immediately, they would simply tire themselves out. The magical shield over the camp dimmed and brightened, its peak brightness slightly dimmer than before. But the mage regiment's mages took no chances. While the shells were expensive, everyone knew Duke Wesson had plenty of money, and no one dared to bet on the end of the bombardment. Heinz, himself an elite-level magician, knew full well that this kind of sustained, steady spellcasting was the most arduous, and prolonged tension could easily break nerves. Equally tormented were the enemy troops, protected by the magic shield. Explosions could be heard overhead, and no one knew when the shield would fail. Outside, the Wesson army had already prepared for the attack, waiting for the magicians to collapse from exhaustion. Half an hour later, he took out his pocket watch and checked it. It was 2 minutes to 10:30. Seeing the enemy's limit approaching, Heinz decisively issued a new order, command, launch the general attack at 10:30. There were no further instructions, the plan had already been laid out, and it seemed unnecessary to alter it. At 10:15, the battlefield suddenly fell eerily quiet. The artillery ceased firing, and the soldiers on the front lines lay dormant, as if nothing had happened. On the barracks wall, a knight with excellent hearing suddenly closed his eyes and listened intently. A moment later, a sudden shudder rang through him. A nearby baron asked his vassal, "What did you hear?" The knight, as if having a terrifying memory, trembled and said, "Some monster is chewing bones." Outside the camp, many bodies were killed or trampled to death by the Wesson cavalry. The bodies were nowhere to be seen on the dark battlefield, but that didn't stop people from knowing they were there. There really are demons, the baron shuddered. The legend of Duke Wesson's demonic army had become deeply ingrained in everyone's minds. This knight wasn't the only one to hear similar sounds. Many nobles knew some minor auxiliary magic, especially those that enhanced hearing. They also heard voices like, "Eat quickly, you, Wesson Lord expletive, still complain it's not orange flavored, remember to brush your teeth before bed, and eat even if it's bitter." Rumors spread rapidly along the wall, and some leading nobles instinctively stepped back. Heinz, like the other officers and soldiers, was chewing on fruit candy, the finger-sized candies crunching in his mouth. Dinner was around 7 o'clock, and I was still quite exhausted, so I quickly grabbed some sugar to replenish my energy. And those damned spirit pills invented by Hosenbras, while refreshing, tasted incredibly bitter. The newspapers said someone was hit by a scammer and fell to the ground, pretending to be dead. But then popped one in their mouth and came back to life. The time had come, and a deafening roar erupted from the artillery positions. All guns abandoned their pursuit of a salvo, loading and firing at top speed. The loaders, after opening the breech blocks, didn't even wait for the shells to fall, but reached out to help. In less than half a minute, the battered magic shield finally shattered, and a burst of flames erupted from the barracks, where the magicians were stationed. A muffled thud echoed outside the barracks as mortars and cherry cannons fired simultaneously at the moment the magic shield shattered, transforming the entire wall into jagged mass in the blink of an eye. Tear gas canisters were also unleashed, and everyone coughed their lungs in the path of the white smoke. The charge blew, and the standard bearers leaped to their feet, hoisting the golden double-headed eagle and the brigade's golden angel flag aloft, charging towards the breach. The soldiers followed their banners and charged. First to enter the camp was a cavalry battalion assigned to Heinz from the cavalry regiment. Led by their commander, Lothar, they charged through the recently shattered gate, carrying the golden double-headed eagle and the steam engine flag. A winding trench had been dug in front of the gate, but it was no match for the mechanical war horses, who easily overran it. The obstacles behind the gate failed to stop the cavalry's charge. Lothar's cavalry sword instantly transformed into a 40-meter-long blade, blazing with light, shattering everything in their path, living and dead. Lothar, without lingering, led his cavalry along the road toward the approximate location of Archduke Regens. The cavalry behind him hurled incendiary bombs at the fenced-off camp. The infantry also rushed to the wall, but instead of launching an immediate attack, they supported the Gatling gunners and mortar gunners as they established positions on the wall, and the regimental commander set up his command post. The Black Cats also reached the wall and began to fire down valuable targets. The Regens Alliance soldiers, as planned, retreated into their barracks and began to defend themselves, returning fire with double-barreled shotguns. The Wessens first launched a mortar barrage, then followed it up with cherry cannons to cover the riflemen's attack. The Wessens Magician Battalion accompanied the infantry, using illusion magic to create a phalanx of soldiers and charge. The Regens Alliance soldiers immediately opened fire, but the tension prevented their multiple bursts of fire, leaving only a barrage of lead bullets colliding with the illusions. While they were reloading, the infantrymen, lying prone on the ground, launched a bayonet charge. Platoons of the Wessens cleared the enemy barracks one by one, following Heinz's orders to kill the nobles first and then persuade them to surrender. Any remaining resistance was met with a barrage of fire. In the center of the camp, Lothar and his cavalrymen came under a barrage of concentrated hunting rifle fire. Due to the distance, the lead bullets dented their breastplates, and the chainmail beneath their limbs couldn't absorb much of the kinetic energy, resulting in many injuries. Lothar simply ordered his troops to flee, firing a signal flare at the camp. Mortars on the outer walls immediately took aim, and soon the camp was engulfed in explosions. Some inside attempted to raise a white flag, but were shattered by shells before they could even raise it. A dozen experts leaped from the camp, attempting to flee the battlefield. But the mortar shells rained down, and one struck a man's helmet, dislodging all of them. After the battle, only the remains of Grand Duke Regens from the waist down were recovered. Grand Duke Franconia fared better. While trapped in a small area of the camp, he challenged Frederick to an honor duel, and Frederick spared his body. The battle ended at 11:50 p.m. on May 30, 1034. The 80,000-strong combined forces of the Franconian Duchy and the Liegentian Alliance suffered over 20,000 casualties, with only 1 in 10 nobles left alive. Wessen's army suffered fewer than 100 casualties. The next day, reading the news in the newspaper, Fadda exclaimed to the quill pen military strategists, "Sir Wesson, 20,000 against 80,000, with such low casualties, is a miracle in World War history. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 358, Farming Time Cannot Be Delayed. As June began, news of victory trickled in. signaling the final victory of Wesson State. Cities continued to surrender, and the recalcitrant enemy was quickly defeated. The announcer's voice drifted over the rolling wheat fields on the village radio, emanating from the vine pavilion beside the drying yard. While the situation at the front was promising, a dark cloud loomed behind. Lizzie Village has now become a promotional base for the Agricultural College of Wessenberg University, where many new crop varieties are first introduced, a source of pride for the villagers. The vine pavilion planted by Matthias is still thriving, its roof extending 2 or 3 meters. It now serves as a place for villagers to relax and discuss matters. Many people sat beneath the pavilion, but unlike in the past, the majority of those gathered today were women. Aside from the village chief, there were few men. The Wesson State Army's offensive against the frontiers had drawn upon a large number of strong laborers from the rear. Like other villages, many men in Lizzie Village were either deployed as background figures or engaged in logistics. This year, the village planted early maturing winter wheat, ready for harvest in early July. However, the village's labor force is significantly reduced, especially for tractor drivers, who were drafted in the first batch. Furthermore, the need for workers in recent years has diminished, with many tenant farmers leaving for work in the city, leaving the village population significantly reduced. The village is now primarily populated by the elderly, the weak, women, and children, and with no idea when the men will return, the farming season cannot be delayed, and there's no way to hire labor from surrounding villages. They're also in need, and worried. The village chief said with a wry smile, "If only we could run the tractor. At night, with the lights on, we could just work a little harder and harvest the wheat." A villager shook his head, "But none of us know how to drive a tractor. Back in the spring, someone stole the tractor from Yingzi village and lost it in a ditch before we even left the village." Many people around nodded in agreement. The incident caused a major uproar, and even villagers from Lizzie village joined the search with their folding shotguns. However, the criminal, while hiding, had been eating sprouting potatoes ready for planting, and by the time they were discovered, they were already cold. Someone suggested lighting lamps in the fields to encourage more work, but that wasn't going to work. After the wheat harvest, the fields needed to be planted with radishes. The wheat straw needed to be chopped and returned to the fields, then drizzled with foul-smelling water from the biogas digester to accelerate decomposition before applying other fertilizers. Finally, deep plowing, digging the soil to a depth of 30 centimeters, would be necessary. If they were exhausted from harvesting, they wouldn't be able to work afterward. Deep plowing, in particular, could only be done with a tractor. If the plow wasn't deep enough, the radishes wouldn't grow. What then? One villager pondered. Should we go to the city and hire some outsiders? The village chief immediately replied, "No, we have to report the harvest and weighing of our wheat to Baron Matthias, and we're worried about the clumsiness of outsiders. What if we mess up and Baron Matthias doesn't plant the seeds properly in our village?" The surrounding villagers nodded in agreement. In the spring, when the tractors in Yingdao village were no longer working, they hired outsiders to work. However, unlike the farmers in Old Wesson, who had annual classes with scholars, these farmers were so rough that the village chief was so angry that he lay down for several days. "I'll learn to drive a tractor." The villagers all looked at the person who spoke. It was a 16-year-old girl named Angela. She had been a bright child since childhood, but she got caught in the rain on the way to school while preparing for her 6th grade graduation exam and developed a fever, so she didn't get into high school. She then went to the Agricultural Technical College for 3 years to study vegetable farming. After graduating last year, she planted cabbage in the village vegetable fields. Laughter erupted in the vine pavilion. A village girl said, "Angela, it would be more practical for you to find a son-in-law who can drive a tractor." Amidst the laughter, another village woman counted on her fingers and said disdainfully, "Do you think learning to drive a tractor is that easy? Can you count how many poles there are? Do you remember which poles to use when? Do you know when to add water? Do you know what to do if the gears won't turn? Do you know how to tighten a loose belt?" She paused, then pretended to remember something. "By the way, the cost of learning to drive a tractor and getting a license isn't cheap. Do you have that much money at home?" She was the sister of a village tractor driver. She'd often boasted about her tractor skills in front of the villagers after hearing her brother talk about it. Angela simply pursed her lips and said nothing. In Wesson, you need a license to drive a tractor. The agricultural technical school she attended had a training and examination center, and she'd helped correct homework and grade exams there during her work-study program. She knew all about it. However, Angela's family's standing in the village was somewhat awkward because of her father, so she rarely boasted about her experiences at school. What left Angela speechless was the tuition. Agricultural technical school also required tuition. Although her family had some savings, they had almost exhausted them. The registration fee for the tractor training was enough, but it probably wouldn't cover rent and living expenses. Then, a dejected man sitting next to her asked, "Angela, are you really going to learn?" Angela bit her lip tightly, then nodded and replied, "Yes, father, I understand." The man stood up. "If you want to learn, go ahead. Don't worry about the tuition." He stood up and turned to leave. A gossipy woman sneered, "Wow, it seems he found gold while collecting compost." Amidst the villagers' laughter, Angela left the vine pavilion and followed her father home. When she arrived, she saw her father digging in the ground in front of the fireplace with a hoe. From the elbow-deep ground, he pulled out a clay pot with a beeswax lid. He opened the lid and pulled out a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. The wooden box was about the size of a palm and coated with a layer of wax. When it was opened, there was a copper ring inside. The ring face was the former coat of arms of the Wesson family, and a roll of parchment was inserted in the middle of the ring. Angela listened to her father slowly say, "Your grandfather used to be a soldier in Wessenberg. He once made some contributions when suppressing bandits. In addition to letting him and me manage the mill, the old count also gave him this, so that he could take it to the castle to get help when he was in trouble, take it to Wessenberg to find the butler Afu. If he is not here, you can go to old Baron Franz." They all know about this. Angela did not expect her father to have such a trick. She only knew that her father was the manager of the mill 10 years ago. Later, because of his mistakes, he was demoted by the Duke of Wesson to a material collector in the composting yard. He was chased by her mother with a pitchfork for a long time, and later became a joke in the whole village. "Then go." Angela's father pressed the wooden box into his daughter's hands. "I'm the one who got you into trouble. If the carriage had waited a few minutes longer that day, you wouldn't have gotten wet in the rain. You might be studying at the University of Wessenberg now. You can learn about tractors, or find another job. It's up to you to make your own way in the future. It's best if you don't come back to this village. You won't have to worry about me anymore." Chapter 359. There is no rule that you cannot sign up. As the village radio began broadcasting the news that the Wesson army had captured another city the previous day, Angela left the village and headed for a nearby bus shelter. Ever since the horse-drawn narrow railway opened, bus shelters had been built near villages to accommodate boarding and alighting. These shelters were designed through a public consultation process, and no two were alike across the entire Wesson state. Angela waited in the chestnut-shaped shelter for a while. In the distance, the sound of bells and the clatter of horse hooves echoed. The bus had arrived. It was summer, so she didn't need many clothes. Her backpack was small, so it only needed one person's fare. The coin box was right next to the driver. She tossed a few coins and found a seat in the back carriage. While it was called a carriage, it was actually similar to the sightseeing buses in Frederick's hometown. The 3.5-meter long, 1.2-meter wide carriage contained 5 rows of chairs, each seating 3 or 4 people. The chairs could be pulled out to accommodate larger loads. There were railings on both sides and a roof above. In case of rain, the rain curtains could be lowered. The train already had 1.5 cars full of passengers, many buying 2 or 3 tickets. They carried baskets filled with fresh produce like vegetables and eggs. Some even had 2 cages of chickens, stacked one on top of the other, ready to take to the town market. Angela walked to the very end of the car and sat down in the last row of seats, which were turned upside down. The chestnut-shaped bus shelter receded into the distance, disappearing around a bend. All that was visible were the wild chestnut groves lining the track, and a flock of early birds just emerging from them. So many people boarded that soon all 3 cars were full. Pulled by 4 horses, they quickly arrived at a town. The town had a train station, a few dozen meters from the narrow-gauge station. Angela rushed there immediately after getting off the train and bought a ticket to Oak City less than 10 minutes before departure. This was a train from the Duchy of Mainz. Many passengers in the hard-seat carriage had just been woken, rubbing their aching necks and backs, then checking their wallets. Outside the train window, the cries of vendors drifted in. Women in white aprons and headscarves, in Germanic with a Helvetic accent, kept telling the breakfast vendors, no bargaining, to sell them things like boiled eggs, boiled potatoes, steamed bread, Wessenlands, boiled sausages, and happy water. Angela had a standing ticket and sat down when she saw an open seat, clutching her backpack tightly. She stared at the Wessenland outside the window, swallowing her saliva. She hesitated for a moment, then decided against buying it. She had already had breakfast before leaving, so she'd save as much as possible while out. Her bag contained daily clothes, a ring left by old Count Wesson, the family savings, and the money her mother had earned from selling cross-stitching in the city yesterday. The ring was too valuable, and Angela didn't plan to use it right away. She thought she might find a part-time job near the school. The train soon arrived at Oak City train station, the final stop. Many people were getting off. Angela was waiting at the train door, getting off as soon as it opened to avoid being trampled. The square outside the station was bustling with activity, with people holding signs and advertisements offering accommodations and directions. Three-wheeled taxis were parked along the roadside. Learning to get a tractor driver's license takes 20 days, and classes begin on the first day of each 10-day period. Today was June 6th, so if you could register, you could start on the 11th, meaning you'd be staying in the city for over 20 days. Angela didn't look for the accommodation ads in front of the train station, intending to look for cheaper options near the school. The Oak City Agricultural Technical School was 5 kilometers away, and both three-wheeled and horse-drawn taxis were prohibitively expensive. Fortunately, there was a bicycle rental shop near the square. While the deposit was hefty, it was refundable if you returned the bike to the shop near the school gate. Oak City was bustling as ever, with construction sites everywhere. Houses had sprouted where the trees once stood, and horse-drawn carts carrying materials were constantly passing by. The most beautiful school in the city was the seminary. Its chapel was decorated with beautiful white glass, and priests in white robes and students in gray robes could be seen from time to time. The largest school was the Agricultural Technical School. The distance from the train station to the school gate was 5 kilometers, 1 kilometer less than the school's circumference. The streets outside the gate were still bustling with activity, offering everything from food, clothing, housing, transportation, and entertainment. However, the students were primarily from farming families, and everything was priced cheaply. Angela returned her car and went to the registration point for motor vehicle training. She saw a long line. With the annual increase in tractor exports from Wesson State, more and more people were coming to learn how to use them. Many of them were trusted members of the landowners who had purchased tractors, and in countless places, the competition for these spots was a scene of grand and minor palace dramas. Angela looked a bit out of place in the line. Although she was relatively strong from years of farm work, she looked particularly petite among the older men, and her relatively pretty face made the contrast even more pronounced. "We're not hiring clerks anymore," the registration point clerk thought she was applying for a position. Angela said, "I'm here to learn how to operate a tractor." The clerk looked at her as if she hadn't heard. Angela pulled her purse from her backpack and repeated earnestly, "I'm here to learn how to operate a tractor." The clerk chuckled, shook his head, and said, "Why would a woman want to learn how to operate a tractor? 20 meters to the left, there's a cross-stitch class and a sewing machine class. You can go there." In a world where strength is respected, powerful tractors have gained a high status. In some places, mastering a tractor is as important as taming a wild horse, a feat only a warrior can achieve. The out-of-towners queuing behind her also laughed. Most of them had fought tooth and nail to get a spot in Wesson State. Now a young woman wanted to learn how to operate a tractor like them, and they felt she was a little ignorant. Seeing Angela place the registration fee on the table, the registration clerk remained unmoved and continued, "Operating a tractor is tiring and dangerous. Don't be fooled by the white steam coming out of that big cylinder. The pressurized steam inside can burn you to death, and even the slightest touch will peel you. Not to mention those pipes, meat will instantly cook if you touch it." He then lifted his left sleeve, and many people waiting in line to register or gathered to watch exclaimed in surprise. His muscular forearm, stretching from elbow to wrist, bore a hideous scar. An experienced eye could tell it was the result of a burn that had healed. The clerk continued, "Not only do you need to know how to operate this tractor, you also need to inspect and repair it. From tightening screws to disassembling and assembling parts, nothing requires significant effort, not to mention the steering wheel. Turning it requires immense effort. My hands are sore after a day. Can you handle it?" Someone in the queue behind him also tried to persuade Angela. "Miss, while driving a tractor pays well, it requires skill. Why not try a different career?" Girls can just stay home and take care of the children and do some embroidery. There's no need for such hard work, a chorus of agreement echoed. In the eyes of ordinary people, working outside the home is a man's job, while women handle household chores. This notion originated in agrarian society, where greater strength in agricultural production equated to higher returns. Men, being stronger than women, were the primary laborers. The economic base determined the superstructure. Whoever earned the most had the final say. Angela bit her lip tightly and pushed the registration fee forward on the table. Excuse me, Angela stared at the clerk, her eyes unflinching. Does the registration requirement stipulate that women can't learn tractor training? The clerk was speechless for a moment. The registration requirements didn't specify gender. Shaking his head, he picked up a pen and wrote on the application form, saying, "Since you want to sign up, then go ahead. Let me make it clear. If you drop out and go home, your tuition won't be refunded." A bystander submitted a story about the day's events to the Wesson Daily, giving it a small section in the daily section. While Frederick was busy reading the newspaper, he clipped the news item and slipped it into his official notebook. He also asked his secretary to arrange for him to attend the graduation ceremony. The war seemed to be drawing to a close, but the subsequent occupation was even more complex than the war itself. Personnel arrangements and legal advocacy in the newly occupied territories were no small task, and the executive yuan worked tirelessly through the night. The most troublesome issue is the Rhine Confederation Nobles Coalition. They weren't really traveling all that far to meet old friends for a night's convention. When Angra finished her registration, more than 300 kilometers away from Wessenberg, the coalition of nobles captured a city that was extremely strategically important to the Rhine Alliance. Chapter 360. They threaten us. The Second Plan Empire, the predecessor of the Confederation of the Rhine, had a roughly vertical rectangle, with an equilateral triangle approximately 200 kilometers long in the south-central part. This formed the western part of the mountainous Bohemian region. The triangle's southern edge bordered the former Confederation of Regensburg, while the northern edge bordered the eastern Elbe River. The Forest Sea region, just west of the apex, bordered the northern Duchy of Franconia. With Frederick's annexation of the Duchy of Franconia and the Confederation of Regensburg, his territory expanded from 8,000 square kilometers to 34,000 square kilometers, and his population increased from 450,000 to 1.85 million. It bordered Bohemia to the east and the Forest Sea to the north. For decades, Bohemia had been contested by the Osmagian Empire and the Piast Kingdom. The nobles there were fickle, side with whichever power prevailed. Suddenly, they woke up to a new, formidable power. The Forest Sea region covers approximately 16,000 square kilometers, stretching from east to west and narrowing from north to south. The western part is mountainous, while the eastern Elbe River basin is a plain. This complex terrain has resulted in a population of smaller nobles, more numerous than the football team of Wesson. Years of war, intermarriage, and division have kept the number of nobles in this region in a state of flux. Even the Osmag Empire, to which they distantly revere as their lord, is unable to comprehend its true number of nobles. Sometimes a baron, newly minted with 2 villages and a castle, would receive recognition from the emperor one day, only to have his home robbed by a neighbor the day before. The exponential growth of the territory's population gave Frederick a severe headache. Any misstep could lead to internal chaos, and the complex new diplomatic landscape caused him to begin losing his hair at a young age. The Duke of Wesson's territories also expanded the territory of the Rhine Confederation. However, the Rhine Confederation's expansion wasn't entirely due to the Duke of Wesson. Crown Prince Rudolf sought to claim the credit for the noble coalition's capture of Lindenberg to garner glory for his upcoming wedding. Lindenberg is located in the upper Elbe River basin, with the Elbe to the north and important tributaries to the east and west. With the exception of the mountains outside Bohemia to the south, it is surrounded by plains on 3 sides. It was captured by the Piast Kingdom in 1027. Previously, the Rhine Confederation had dispatched emissaries to the nobles of the Forest Sea and Upper Elbe regions, explaining that they were only heading south to attack the Duchy of Franconia. They hoped that friends along the way would make way, and even more so if they could sell them some grain. Now that the Osmagian Empire had entered the final stages of the struggle for the throne, and the Piast Kingdom had focused its attention eastward, the lesser nobles, naturally, put on smiles but also apprehensively bid a farewell to these troublemakers. Adhering to the principle that everyone's well-being is truly beneficial, the nobles offered fair prices for grain, occasionally gave small gifts, and compensated for crops damaged by horses, creating a scene of great joy. Suddenly, a major news broke among the Allied forces: the grain sold to them by Lindenberg was moldy. For a moment, the coalition forces were in a frenzy. Even the petty nobles who had come to enjoy the meal chimed in. The moldy grain was discovered on the afternoon of June 3rd. The coalition forces set out overnight, using both land and sea forces. They surrounded Linden City on the afternoon of the 5th and captured the city before noon the next day. By the time the details of the battle were revealed, many participants had already passed away, but afterward, many inferred the truth from the subsequent appointments of officials. After all, when merit is rewarded, no one benefits in vain. In particular, a joke soon spread in Linden City. Several individuals who had accused each other of being undercover agents for the Rhine Alliance the previous night suddenly discovered they were all undercover. This detail was unknown at the time, and the world was shocked by the sudden rise of the Rhine Alliance. At this point, the Rhine Alliance held two bridgeheads, Hammer and Linden City, one to the north and one to the south, and coveted their homeland east of the Elbe. Only the forests and seas on the west bank of the Elbe, and a small part of the northern part, remained unalienated from the Rhine Alliance royal family. But now, with their land routes cut off from the Osmaga Empire, switching sides was inevitable. Many political figures saw it as only a matter of time before the Rhine Confederation regained its former territories and regained its former glory. A growing Rhine Confederation wouldn't bode well for us. By the shimmering river, King Louis the Elder of Gaul and his younger brother, Prince Louis, discussed the current international situation. Louis the Elder bent down, picked up a flat, round pebble, gestured, and threw it. The stone bounced twice before plunging back into the water. "I'm getting old," a look of dejection crossed the old king's face. "Ferdinand of Osmaga is missing, William of the Rhine is dying, and in England, my good nephew Edward has been seriously ill since his assassination. Gaspard of Lisenberg suffered a stroke from drinking too much. It seems the God of Light will soon send a host of kings to heaven to report on their duties, and I can't escape it either." The attendants and guards around him lowered their heads, especially the captain of the guard, who had grown up with the king. When the king was a prince at 5 or 6, he could throw 7 or 8 skips, and in his teens and 20s, he could manage nearly 100. Even now, he couldn't resist the ravages of time. The crown prince on the side said expressionlessly, "Father, you can live longer if you go to the Moulin Rouge less often." Old Louis began to change the subject and asked his son calmly, "How do you think we should deal with the rise of the Rhine?" Little Louis shrugged and said, "The throne of Osmagoria cannot be stable for a few years. Pist is heading east with all his strength. After Antonia and Rudolf get married in a few days, our two countries will be back to back. Now is the best time for the external environment of the Rhine Alliance." Old Louis nodded. The son who had been carefully cultivated for many years had a qualified sense of the overall situation. This was the most important ability for a king. Specific matters could be handed over to reliable nobles. "It's us," said young Louis, somewhat helplessly. He waved his hand to get everyone around him to move away and continued, "For nearly 100 years, we first supported Caledonia in resisting the Anglais. And after that failed, we went on to support Hibernia. Our enmity with the Anglais is too deep. I have unconfirmed information. A few years ago, Lisenberg and the Rhine united to deal with us, and it was the Anglais who brokered it. Now our national policy is to develop towards the rich inland sea in the south, and the north is relatively on the defensive. The Anglais will not miss the opportunity. Lisenberg in the west is still recovering its strength. There is no doubt that they will retaliate against us in a few years." Old Louis nodded and asked, "How do you deal with external threats?" Young Louis replied, "I have a North Sea fortress plan. I will build a line of defense along the northern and western coastal areas. First, to intimidate and stop the enemy at sea, and second, to delay and consume the enemy's strength after they land. On land, I plan to build a similar line of defense along the border between our country and the Rhine to prevent them from attacking, while at the same time limiting their attack direction to the low-lying coastal areas. We can concentrate our forces on defense and counterattack." Louis Sr. nodded and said, "This means encasing the country in armor and then focusing all our efforts on developing southward." Louis Jr. continued, "This is just self-preservation. It won't counter the rise of the Rhine. The easiest way to hold the Rhine back is to plunge them into internal chaos, drain their strength, and prevent them from facing the outside world. For example, we can create a conflict between the royal family and Wesson. We can secretly promote Wesson, For example, by getting the lesser nobles on both sides of the Elbe, who previously obeyed Osmaga, to follow him. This will inevitably create a rift between the royal family and him. Wait 2 years until Antonia has established herself. By then, William will have died. Then, have her persuade Rudolph to grant the city's autonomy, and let the royal family and the nobles fight it out. Louis Sr. nodded with satisfaction. His initial decision to agree to the marriage was intended to undermine the Rhine Confederation. He didn't seek to usurp the throne, just to disrupt it. Louis Jr. took a deep breath and whispered, "We need an ally in the Inner Sea. I plan to form an alliance with the Ghazi Empire." Louis Sr. frowned and said, "They're pagans." Louis Jr. simply shrugged, looking unconcerned. Old Louis gazed at the river ahead, pondering for a long time before deciding not to express his opinion. The next day, young Louis embarked on a journey to the Rhine Alliance to attend his cousin's wedding. "I had a brain glitch. Last month, I typed chapter 345 as chapter 315. Everything went smoothly from then on, but today I realized there were other number errors. I can't change the chapter title, so I'll just leave it as it is. Chapter 361 Promotion. June 16th, His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Rudolph of the Rhine Confederation, and Princess Antonia of the Kingdom of Gaul held a grand wedding in Cologne. Duke Wesson, bound for war, sent Foreign Minister Baron Christian as his plenipotentiary representative to the wedding, presenting a carefully prepared gift, a paraglider. The canton of Wesson also extended its congratulatory wishes to the Crown Prince, as the Duke of Wesson had decreed a day off. Since the beginning of June, the entire cantonal government, from Minister of Administration Frick to the cooks and the town's government cafeteria, has been swamped with activity. Conquering a territory isn't just about marking it on a map. It requires the establishment of a comprehensive government structure to manage it. With both territory and population having more than tripled, the executive branch is facing a significant challenge. Previously, the administrative divisions of the canton of Wesson were divided into 3 levels: canton, city, and town. Now, the Duchy of Wesson is a done deal. The Duchy of Franconia and the Confederation of Regensburg have been merged and split into 3 cantons, Lankeny, Fan, and Putz, from west to east. This brings the administrative divisions to a 4-tier system: duchy, canton, city, and town. This creates numerous vacancies within government departments. Talented officials from Wesson need to be transferred or given a salary increase of 1 or 2 levels to new positions. Remaining officials also need to be reassigned to new positions and receive training. This has left the entire administrative system incredibly busy. The most notable of these are the governors of the 4 cantons. Previously, the governor of Wesson was the Duke of Wesson, but with rumors circulating that he will no longer hold the post, ambitious individuals are eager to take on the role. The first rumor to emerge is that Franz, president of the Football Association, will be appointed governor of Putz. This is widely accepted. The old baron, loyal and dedicated, has spent recent years enjoying retirement within the Football Association. It's understandable that he would enjoy the honors of a governorship before his final retirement. Next, Baron Neuer, the Minister of Taxes, was appointed governor of Lankn. He was also an elder in Wesson. His daughter, Taro, was the Duke of Wesson's personal maid, now called his personal secretary, and her loyal family. This arrangement seemed reasonable to everyone. Soon after, the choice for governor of Fea was announced. Much to everyone's surprise, it was Minister of Agriculture, Matthias. Some believe that the Duke of Wesson made this appointment to balance the power between the old Wesson faction and the academic faction, while others argued that Fea, a region already well developed in agriculture, should be managed by an agricultural expert to promote local agriculture. Each had their own merits. The debate was brief, and everyone awaited the appointment of the new governor of Wesson. People believe that Wesson was the Duke of Wesson's most valuable region, and the governor must be someone of exceptional ability and loyalty. Some even suggested that with the current Minister of Administration, Frick, about to retire, the governor of Wesson was a potential candidate for the position. It was now widely believed that the person who would ultimately take the position was Finance Minister Erhard. Although he was born in Nuremberg and had only assumed a prominent position under Duke Wesson 8 years ago, he had consistently performed exceptionally well over the years, earning numerous commendations from the Duke. Even Fata considered Erhard the perfect choice for governor of Wesson, only to lose out on a feast of roasted whole camels, which he had sent from his hometown. On the day off for the Crown Prince's wedding, Amit's house was immaculately clean, The flowers in the garden were in full bloom, an awning had been erected on the lawn, and a spot had been reserved for roasted whole wind dragons in the center of the long dining table. Today's guests are a dazzling array of stars, mainly heroes who graduated from the Royal University of Constantine. They are Vice President of the University of Wessenland, expert in necromancy, winner of the Golden Durian Magic Award, and convenience food tycoon Manuel, the incoming governor of the Faria State, expert in plant magic, winner of the Golden Durian Biology Award, and a man whose achievements are too advanced to be displayed, the seed industry tycoon Matthias, the next Minister of Agriculture, livestock breeding expert, winner of the Golden Durian Biology Award, and feed tycoon Monifler, the director of the Metallurgy Department of the Ministry of Industry who will replace Ahmed as Minister of Industry, senior expert in metal materials, winner of this year's Golden Durian Alchemy Award. And a man whose achievements are too advanced to be displayed, Monaltz, the first tier of the wealth list, winner of the Golden Durian Human Medicine Award, the pharmaceutical tycoon unemployed poisoner Friedrich, dean of the Alchemy School of the University of Wessenland, the fertilizer tycoon Fritz Diesel, one of the founders of the Wesson Army's ordnance industry, an expert enjoying special treatment from the Wesson state government, and a rising implosion machine tycoon, Julius, director of the Wesson Army's Explosives Research Institute, an expert enjoying special treatment from the Wesson state government, winner of the Golden Durian Alchemy Award, and whose achievements are too advanced to be displayed. Together with the new governor of Wesson State, Almite, an expert in golem puppets and simulated souls, winner of the Golden Durian Magic Award, and whose achievements are too advanced to be displayed, these 8 people are known to gossipers as the nine-headed siren of Wessenland University and form the core of the academic school. Also included are Almite students, including Schmidt, director of the Wesson Heavy Machinery Plant, hailed by Frederick as the Pearl of Wesson State, BASF, a slime glue giant ranked in the top tier of the wealth list, and Duval, the thermos magnate. They are all the backbone of the academic school. In high spirits, Almite, drinking from his glass, chatted and laughed with the crowd. Diesel smiled and said, "A few days ago, after eating grilled swordfish at Matthias's house, I only ate some steamed buns and vegetables, just to wait for today's meal." Almite smiled and said, "Okay, I'll let you finish eating the tail later. The wind dragon is not big in size, and its tail is about the same size as a human leg. It lives in the dark continent in the north and is rarely sold in Wesson State." Manuel came over and talked about business. "I didn't expect that you and Matthias could become governors. It's beyond everyone's expectations." Ahmed raised the glass in his hand and said, "This is all the cultivation of the principle." Manuel sighed with emotion. 10 years have passed in a blink of an eye. Who could have thought of this day when we got off the ship? Yeah, Diesel nodded. In the first 6 months, I didn't even dare to open all my luggage, for fear that I would leave suddenly again. At this time, Matthias came over and said with a sad face, "There were too many things I couldn't think of at that time. I'm really afraid that this is all a dream these days. Now I can't sleep well every day. I read books whenever I have time, for fear of messing things up." Manuel asked him curiously, "Are you reading The Nature and Study of Wealth published 2 days ago?" The manuscript that Frederick wrote on the dwarf island in the inland sea at the beginning of the year was finally published after being improved overnight by Adam, the Minister of Commerce, and reviewed by Psyche. The books he wrote were valued by the world and sold very well. Manuel and others naturally bought a copy back. For the people of Wessex, this book served as a guide, but for merchants from other provinces, it contained a prophecy. The Duke of Wessex predicted the collapse of the currently booming tulip market. Consequently, many merchants from other provinces blocked the printing factory's entrance overnight, vying to obtain the book and return it as soon as possible. Crowds also gathered in front of the telegraph office, eager to inquire about the current tulip market back home. However, Matthias shook his head and said, "It's How to Be a Governor written by Duke Wesson not long ago." Ahmed continued, "I also got this book, and it was sent together with a letter of appointment. Everyone here is a scholar, and they are very interested in books. The title of this book sounds very powerful." Manuel asked the question that everyone wanted to ask, "Can you lend it to me to have a look?" Diesel and Julius next to him work in the arsenal and are very sensitive to confidentiality issues. Their notebooks are all classified. Julius asked, "Is this book classified?" Diesel also said, "If it is classified, then forget it." Manuel thought so too. Government affairs cannot be made public at will, so he said, "I'm presumptuous. Just pretend I didn't ask." Ahmed and Matthias looked at each other and shook their heads together. "There's no classified marking on it," Ahmed said. "I'm afraid the content isn't what you think. It's more like a philosophy book." The principal analyzes many cases that have appeared in newspapers and argues that only through analysis, comparison, rejection, and exclusion can one understand and discover the laws of things and solve problems encountered at work. Matthias also said, the principal advocates eliminating all doubts and leaving only the undoubted. He advocates reducing the complex to its simplest form, connecting all parts, aspects, and factors to understand and grasp the whole from the simple. The more comprehensive and thorough the statistics, the better, to ensure nothing is missed. He shook his head again and said, "Let's stop here, before it turns into a philosophical discussion. I'm still looking forward to eating roasted wind dragons." Everyone around laughed. For scholars, philosophical discussions are serious matters and difficult to conclude, easily taking up an entire day. The discussion then turned to the winners of the 1034th Golden Durian Awards, to be held next month. Now it was Fritz's turn to brag. His project, submitted this year, had a good chance of ridding him of the label of being the only one among the Hydra without a Golden Durian Award, potentially becoming the one whose achievements were too advanced to be displayed. Meanwhile, the main course, roasted whole wind dragon cub, was served. Everyone took their seats, toasted their glasses to the president's health, and began to eat. Unbeknownst to them, an unprecedented storm was about to strike. Chapter 362. The eve of the storm. Yesterday afternoon, the Wesson army entered Coburg. A radio broadcast the news from the dining room of a luxurious mansion in the city of Amstel in the Low Countries. At the table, Frau Franken leisurely ate her Wesson breakfast roll, consisting of 2 slices of bread with a slice of cheese, vegetables, or meat, a perfectly adequate portion for breakfast. While the people of the Low Countries likely didn't know the significance of this news, Frau Franken certainly knew. Coburg was the northernmost castle in the Duchy of Franconia and a key gateway to the forest and ocean regions. Its capture meant that the Wesson army controlled all of Franconia. Under Richardnell's friendly persuasion, Frau Franken, realizing her family's partnership was doomed, agreed to a respectable departure with her 2 children, both under 10, and her servants. She came from a noble family in Bohemia and had a barony in her family that was destined for her second daughter. However, without the Grand Duke of Franken as her backer, she needed to raise an army to protect it, and raising an army cost money. To the north of the Duchy of Franconia lies a forested and maritime region. Over the years, Madame Franconia has leveraged the resources and markets there to establish a trade union. Instead of returning home, she traveled to Amstel to liquidate the trade union and recruit mercenaries to fight back. The morning news concluded with the arrival of the Flying Tulip. Madame Franconia's steward reported the day's work schedule. "Madam, Baron Shylock from Venice has requested an audience again." Madame Franconia waved her hand away, as if shooing away a fly, without saying a word. After word of her proposed sale of the trade union spread, many interested merchants approached, offering very low prices. It's common to offer exorbitant prices and then settle them later. But Baron Shylock was different. He wasn't just after money, he was after her sex. Specifically, he wanted the publicity of having slept with a Grand Duchess, to boost his worth. The butler continued, "As of yesterday, the highest bidder was still from the Sea Flame merchants." Mrs. Franken recalled that the Sea Flame merchants were also new, rumored to be from the north. In recent years, they had accounted for half of the top 10 tulip sales each year, making a tidy profit. Tulip bulbs, once dug up, were wrapped in boiling hay and stored in a cool, dark place. They could generally preserve for 2 to 3 months. Rumor has it that someone has developed a method to preserve them for 2 to 3 years, but the technology hasn't been made public, and it's the Sea Flame merchants who mastered it. Mrs. Franken thought for a moment and said, "The most valuable thing in the merchant's business is the tulips. This year's new bulbs will be on the market in the next 2 days, and those people are trying to bargain down the price and buy them from me, hoping to make a quick buck." The butler reminded her, "Madam, our tulip bulbs have been dug up, sorted, and packaged. If we don't find a merchant to sell them to soon, they'll rot on our hands." Large quantities of tulips are usually purchased by well-connected local merchants, and they don't stay on their hands for long. Those without connections might wait and sell slowly, and the new crop might not be sold by the time the fields are planted, leaving them to rot. Mrs. Franken now faced this very problem. As an outsider with no connections, she had previously sold to other chambers of commerce. Forget about those chambers, she gritted her teeth. If we can't reach an agreement in the next 2 days, let our Chamber of Commerce set up a retail stall outside, selling at wholesale prices. We don't have that much time. The sooner we sell the goods, the sooner we get the money, the sooner we can hire troops to go back. The butler promised to do it immediately. However, no merchants came to negotiate that day. The carriages outside Amstel's largest bank were particularly numerous today. In the lounge next to the VIP negotiation room, many prominent merchants glared at each other, ready to strike each other down. A bank employee approached the door and said, "Please invite VIP number 8 to the VIP room for business." Baron Shylock from Venice jumped up, straightened his appearance as he walked, coughed twice to clear his throat, and walked out of the lounge with confidence. The VIP negotiation room was furnished with 2 spring sofas and a coffee table in the middle. At the desk by the door sat the bank's vice president and 2 staff members. Baron Shylock walked over to the sofa and extended his hand to shake today's partner. Shylock, the plenipotentiary representative of the merchants of Venice. For people like them, it's easy to say one thing to one person and another to another. The other party had no title, but he might be a member of a royal family, and he had something to ask of him, so he didn't mention his title. A thin man with a face as expressionless as a wooden sculpture stood up from the sofa and also extended his hand. Jace, Chief Commercial Officer of the Sea Flame Chamber of Commerce. After they sat down, Jace asked, "Excuse me, sir, do you understand our terms of trade?" Shylock nodded and replied, "Cash only." Jace picked up a form from the coffee table and handed it over, saying in a flat voice, "Here are the goods and prices our chamber can offer. Delivery is June 25th. Sherlock took the list of tulip varieties and prices for sale from the Sea Flame Chamber of Commerce and noticed that the top ones were marked with limited quantities. The most expensive one had 3 zeros after the price, while the cheapest, limited to 50, had 2 zeros after the price. Those were the most expensive tulips, and shipping them back to Sardinia would yield at least 10 times the profit. The following varieties were significantly cheaper and available in larger quantities. Sherlock noticed that the wholesale price of the non-limited tulips on his list was only slightly more than double the same period last year, a significant discount compared to the retail price, which was at least 6 times higher. He quickly calculated that this wasn't the entire stock of the maritime flame merchants. The price was much cheaper than he'd expected, and he could probably buy it all if he gritted his teeth. The two sides then entered into a bargaining phase. After some back and forth, Sherlock realized the other side hadn't conceded much, but the total price after buying everything exceeded his available cash. Fortunately, the Venetian merchants were well known along the North Sea coast. Sherlock immediately negotiated a loan with the bank's vice president, then signed a contract with Jace, and finally processed the transfer on the spot. Sherlock left the meeting room with a bright smile on his face. It was time for some official meals and drinks. 10 days later, the goods would be picked up and loaded onto a ship. They would sail up the Rhine, through Wesson, then down the Danube, into the inland sea, and back to Venice. On average, this trip had yielded a 6-fold profit. He calculated his commission and the fact that he could keep the most expensive tulip bulbs for himself. Each bulb could be exchanged for a mansion with a garden and carriage house when he returned. Thinking of this, he suddenly realized how lovely the constant northwest wind was. Even more endearing was the short-haired girl passing by. Her hair gleamed like gold, her eyes like emeralds, and most captivating of all was her radiant confidence. Feeling smug, Baron Shylock arranged his funeral documents, left his attendants behind, and strode over to the girl. He spoke to her affectionately, as if they were on the streets of Venice. "Ah, as beautiful as the most delicate flower in a garden." From behind the short-haired girl, a girl with long red hair rushed out, kicked Baron Shylock, and then began to punch and kick him. Baron Shylock's followers rushed over upon seeing their boss being beaten. Behind the short-haired girl, a large group of men, recognizable by their skin color as sailors, rushed out and attacked without a word. For a moment, the square outside the bank erupted in curses from both locals and Wesson. Some of the Venetian attendants were skilled in martial arts, but the opponent's attack was too insidious, and the local shoes, a characteristic of the region, were carved from a single piece of wood and had pointed toes. The Venetians soon collapsed, clutching their crotches. The city defense forces, upon arriving, saw that the person being beaten was a foreigner, and that the attacker was Miss Lilu, a well-known local landowner, and that Duke Wesson, who stood behind her, had a good reputation in the city. so they waited until the beating was over before dragging the man away. Chapter 363, Planning to take advantage of the fire. The incident at the bank didn't prevent Lulu from distributing the sailors' wages. In the bank's most luxurious VIP room, she handed the appropriation slip to the president. 10 minutes later, the sailors received their salaries and bonuses for their voyage around the western continent at a dedicated counter. After completing the transfer, Lulu returned to the mansion purchased by the Dawn Chamber of Commerce in Amstel. Lunchtime was approaching, and several people at the table were studying a telegram. Dawn Chamber of Commerce President Shupaia and their maritime ally, Baron Edition, had been here for 2 weeks. Lulu had just returned yesterday evening at midnight, and the three of them were studying the coded telegram that Frederick had sent that morning. Shupaia said, "I received a secret telegram from Duke Wesson a month ago, asking me to pay attention to the tulip market. It's already at Crumbling House, and no one knows who will give it a fatal kick at any time." Baron Adelkin shook his head and said, "Tulips are really crazy now. Many young men in my place talk about this when they have free time, and they throw all their savings into it. Not long ago, I received a telegram from Duke Wesson specifically talking about this. I relied on his reputation to get those guys to sell off the goods in their hands." A red-haired girl sitting next to Lulu said, "I heard that the price of tulips this month is 30% higher than last month. It doesn't seem to be a problem at all. This Christina is the bodyguard chief, personal bodyguard and secretary that Lulu found in the city of Londinium, in the Kingdom of England, not long ago. Her grandfather was an instructor in the seaman school run by Frederick in a middle-level cadre." Baron Adelkin was familiar with her grandfather and said to her, "When it comes to money, no one dares not believe what Duke Wesson says." Shupaia nodded and said, "Yes, the Guild Alliance was on the verge of bankruptcy before, and then Duke Wesson asked us to analyze the information left behind and start the insurance industry. Within a few years, our Dawn Chamber of Commerce developed." Christina heard about the Dawn Chamber of Commerce and felt it was amazing. She decided to ask about it when she had time. As she spoke, Lulu finished studying the secret telegram sent by Frederick this morning and said, "Frederick banned us from participating in the tulip business from the beginning. We have been running around outside and have not been affected. He plans to take this opportunity to purchase a batch of ships and follow the teacher to eliminate pirates. All the expenses will be paid by the Dawn Chamber of Commerce. I think he is starting to prepare to build a navy." Shupaia also said, "The instructions he gave me are similar. Acquire various industries as much as possible, preferably from chambers of commerce with trade licenses overseas." Christina whispered to Lulu, "Isn't Wesson State far away from the sea? If it's just maritime trade, armed merchant ships will be enough. There's no need for warships, right?" Lulu did not answer. At that moment, Shupaia remembered something and whispered, "I've heard a rumor that the Low Countries government and the Gallic nobility are colluding to invest public funds in tulips. If tulip prices collapse, they might not be able to repay next year's public debt." He then looked at Lulu and said, "I think Miss Lulu's land holdings may increase again." Everyone knew Lulu was Frederick's patron saint. Frederick was wealthy now. If the Low Countries government couldn't repay its debts, the Gallic kingdom, also affected by the tulip price collapse, would likely be unable to help. Frederick was the only one who could help in the short term. But there was no reason for them to help you repay such a large sum of money for no reason. So, they could use the land as collateral for centuries. Lulu simply shook her head and said, "Let's not discuss this matter any further. If it really comes to that, Frederick will have to deal with it personally." She knew Frederick's overall plans for the Low Countries. This was the Gallic kingdom's sphere of influence. Excessive expansion would lead to conflict. Now was not the time for conflict. Shupaia consciously lowered her position by half and changed the subject, saying, "During this period, I have mobilized a large amount of funds in the name of preparing to enter the tulip market. Wesson Bank originally planned to allocate a sum of money, but it was postponed to mid-July due to the war. I heard rumors that there are too many places to spend money after the war, and I'm afraid that even if this money arrives, it will be much less. Another problem may be very serious: food. More than 90% of the grain produced by our reclaimed land is shipped to Wesson State. The local grain production has decreased a lot because of tulips. The price of imported grain has not been low in the past 2 years. If the price of tulips collapses, many ordinary citizens will be stuck with goods, and the price of grain will not come down. I am afraid it will cause unrest." Lulu frowned. She is a local and her family and friends live here. If unrest is caused, it will be easy for her to be attacked because she nominally controls a large amount of grain. I'll handle this, she said, turning around. Christina, after lunch, send a telegram to Frederick asking him to authorize me to handle this year's summer and autumn harvests. The state of Wesson currently needs to import large quantities of grain, especially during the current war. The shortage will be even greater for a long time to come due to the construction of new territories. Farms in the lowlands are a vital food supply base. Business isn't all about fighting and killing, or scolding your opponents to death. It's also about the human relationships. Shupaya wanted to use the food here to be a hero, but she didn't dare. Baron Addition looked at his student with satisfaction, remembering how she had bitten her lip despite being terrified when he first took her out to sea and encountered a storm. In the blink of an eye, she had grown into a decision-maker who dared to take the initiative and shoulder heavy responsibilities. Someone came over and whispered something in Shupaya's ear. Shupaya frowned and told everyone, "The latest news is that the Maritime Flame Chamber of Commerce has sold all of its tulips, leaving no seeds. The transaction will be completed on the 25th of this month, and tonight they'll be auctioning off their technology for long-term preservation of tulip bulbs." This news wouldn't have been a big deal if it had come anytime soon, but combined with Frederick's telegram today, it felt like a coincidence or connection. Christina said, "I've heard of them. They're probably the white gloves of a royal family. They've gained a high reputation in the tulip industry over the years thanks to their tulip sales, and they've cultivated many rare new varieties, but they've always had a chief commercial officer named Jess. No one knows who the president is, not even if he's a man or a woman." After a brief discussion, the group found themselves with no clues, so they put the matter aside. It was lunchtime. Lulu and Christina had just returned from the sea, and the main course before them was mainly vegetables. Their plates were surrounded by a circle of grilled sausage slices, and in the middle was the main dish, a local specialty made by boiling spinach, chicory, and carrots in a pot, draining the water, and then mashing them with butter, salt, and parsley. Shupaya and Baron Addition had fish fillets and shrimp coated in flour and deep-fried, topped with their favorite sauces and fruits. Everyone continued to talk about tulips while eating, and after discussing opportunities to buy at the bottom, they talked about the shipyards in Wesson. According to the plan, Lulu's flying tulip would rest in Amstel for a while, and then go to the shipyard for a thorough repair and inspection to gain experience for the new ship. As lunch preparations were finished, a telegram brought new news that left everyone puzzled. Dawn was coming to visit for a few days. Chapter 364 The Storm is Coming. Many assumed that Duke Wesson had just won a resounding victory on the battlefield, and that he would be celebrating with delicious food, fine wine, and beautiful women day and night, with no 2 days repeating the same. Only political figures knew that now was a crucial moment in determining the political landscape of the Rhine Confederation. Strength determines status. Later, The Romance of Emperor Wei in the Far West, published by Teo Huishi, evaluated Frederick at that time as follows. At that time, Emperor Wei controlled 4 states and had a population of 1 million, ranking second. He benefited from the canal factory and had a lot of gold and silver. The Death Legion under his command was feared by the world, and his military achievements were unprecedented in the ancients. In the first battle, he broke the siege of 5 counts and occupied all their land. In the second battle, he defeated 100,000 with 800 troops on the Elbe River. In the third battle, he rushed into the battle line under the city of Hanma and killed the king of Danma. In the fourth battle, he killed the god of France while the wine was still warm. In the fifth battle, the emperor was drowned by the flood. In the sixth battle, he rushed 100 miles alone to rescue his nephew. In the seventh battle, he trapped Ghazi with a clever trick. In the eighth battle, he trapped 80,000 with 20,000 troops. His reputation was unmatched in the world, and the power of the emperor was established. Now Frederick had the capital to establish a principality. Political creatures were waiting for his choice: A. Dependence of the principality on the Rhine alliance, B. Superficial dependence on the principality that was actually independent, C. Attack the city of Cologne and seize the throne, D. Establish an independent country and become king. At the end of the war, Frederick's whereabouts disappeared from newspapers and radio broadcasts. The speeches and instructions reported daily were clearly pre-planned. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate in Cologne that envoys had been dispatched to engage in secret negotiations with Frederick. Many political figures eagerly dispatched spies to investigate the progress of the negotiations, hoping to respond promptly. However, these agents searched Cologne, Wesson, and even the Duchy of Mainz in Bavaria, but were unable to locate the negotiating parties. On the morning of June 18, in the dining room of a hotel in the Amstel business district, Frederick shared breakfast at a window table with a bespectacled, scholarly-looking elderly man. Count Ranke, the interior minister of the Confederation of the Rhine, was a prominent figure at court. He held a high position of power but was aloof from society, never appearing at banquets, balls, or hunting events hosted by the nobility. Frederick had not met him during his previous visit to Cologne. Frederick still held the title of finance minister of the Confederation of the Rhine, though it was half a rank lower than that of the interior minister, so he was now meeting with a superior. Count Ranke used a dinner knife to roll the fish filing into strips, then breaded and fried them until golden brown. He cut the strips in half, drizzled a little red tomato sauce on them, and then cut them into individual pieces, slowly eating. In front of Frederick was a sausage bun, also made of meat filling rolled into strips, covered in dough, and toasted light bread. Count Ranke was not talkative during dinner, so the two ate in silence. This cement inn, built 2 years ago, was owned by the Dawn Chamber of Commerce. The manager was Lilu's second uncle, the waiters were all her cousins, and the cooks were all her aunts and uncles. The staff was reliable and the facilities were well equipped, so Frederick chose it as the venue for the negotiations. However, the Chamber of Commerce personnel, led by Chaupatio himself, were directly serving the two negotiating protagonists today. Baron Edition's own guards were responsible for security, while Count Ranke's men were stationed outside. Many owners of major guilds would display such pomp and circumstance, and the locals took no notice. After breakfast, the two men remained seated at the table. After the dishes were cleared away, tea was served. Frederick personally poured Count Ranke a cup of tea. He didn't mention the negotiations, but instead asked, "I heard your son is a historian." Count Ranke feigned relief, took a sip, and said, "I was worried you'd ask about my granddaughter. I hid her well before you left." Frederick simply smiled. He had previously heard from a knight, Gugu, about the lives of the great nobles in Cologne. The daughters of the Ranke family spent their days buried in books, unlike the daughters of other families. He looked regretful and said, "I think that a historian should witness history with his own eyes and feel history firsthand, rather than digging up history in piles of old papers." Then he pointed out the window and said, "The reason why I arranged the negotiation location here is because an unprecedented major event is about to take place, so I'm sorry to trouble you to make a trip here." Count Ranke looked out the window. Unlike other hotel restaurants on the first floor, the restaurant of this hotel was on the rooftop of the 7th floor. The side facing the street was all bright glass windows, from which you could see a large street scene. He asked Frederick, "Are you talking about the history you predicted, the plummeting price of tulips?" Frederick took a sip from his teacup and said, "Studying history isn't just about reconstructing what happened, it's also about understanding why." Count Ranke nodded and said, "A very inspiring perspective." Frederick stood up and turned to the window, looking out at the bustling street below and the crowded entrance to the Chamber of Commerce across from the hotel. He said in a deep voice, "History's most important significance is that it guides us, allowing us to learn from the experiences of our predecessors. The future, the brand new future, will be unprecedented. We don't have time to study it in reams of old papers. Only by being in the midst of the current can we discern any patterns." Count Ranke's deep gaze fixed on Frederick. His previous words seemed contradictory, but the premise of a brand new future made some sense. He suddenly realized he couldn't read the young man. With his years of knowledge and experience, he couldn't predict Frederick's next move. The noise downstairs grew louder, shouting and cursing incessantly, as more and more people rushed to the Chamber of Commerce across the street. Mrs. Franken, perched on the 3rd floor of the Chamber of Commerce, peered through the curtains at the bustling crowd below. She didn't notice someone watching her from the floor above, much less realize she'd just hit the first domino. A long table stood in front of the Chamber of Commerce, and behind it, wooden crates of tulip bulbs lined the wall. A sign listed the varieties and prices, and the prices were significantly cheaper than at other chambers of commerce. Tulip prices had been rising steadily over the years, though there were occasional fluctuations, often due to deliberate price cutting before the contract season, which quickly rebounded. Everyone believed the price of this flower of wealth would continue to rise. All it took was a few days for the onion-like bulbs to yield even more gold. Baron Shylock had just been released from his cell this morning after paying his fine. While eating breakfast, he heard his attendant bring word of a price reduction on tulip bulbs. He sneered, "Don't be afraid. It's just a technical adjustment, nothing to worry about. This time, which Chamber of Commerce is suppressing the prices of certain varieties of tulips to secure contracts? The quantity won't be large, they'll be sold out before noon. Many shared his sentiments. Opportunities were fleeting. Artisans, boatmen, cooks, waiters, even old women mending clothes on the roadside, who had heard the news, rushed home to collect money or pooled funds with friends and family to snag a bulb or two before the regular price increase. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, merchants in Amstel noticed something was amiss. The Chamber of Commerce showed no signs of stopping its price reductions. Horse-drawn carts constantly brought crates of bulbs to the back door and then to the front for sale. It didn't seem like they were trying to suppress prices, but rather to clear out their stock. Well-informed people began blocking the back entrance of the Chamber of Commerce to buy. By the time Frederick and Count Rank arrived at the alleyway, it was packed. A sailor even knocked the silk-robed Count Rank off balance, knocking his wig off. Frederick's quick eyes and hands saved him from falling. "This is madness," Count Rank shook his head. "There's never been anything like this in history." The bulbs were sold out, and with no one in the front to buy, more and more people rushed in. Frederick and his companions, seeing the situation was dire, fled without even taking the wigs that had fallen to the ground. The carriages arriving in the alley were blocked outside and immediately surrounded by people trying to buy. Mrs. Franken's housekeeper saw this and told the Chamber of Commerce members to sell the bulbs right there, to avoid a crowd blocking the road and causing trouble for the local authorities. The situation began to spiral out of control. Tulip bulbs were constantly arriving from Mrs. Franken's rented farm, and the siege on the carriages spread from the Chamber of Commerce's back entrance all the way to the city gates. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone knew about the drop in tulip prices. Some residents who had previously hoarded bulbs decided to cut their losses and took them to a market specifically for retail tulip buyers, offering to sell them at a slightly lower price to sell them quickly. However, the small retailers who specialized in selling tulip bulbs there had already gotten the news and lowered the prices. From that moment on, tulip prices officially began to plummet. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365 The Storm is Coming. As the tulip trade flourished and attracted more and more participants, the city of Amstel opened a market for retail traders, becoming one of the busiest spots in the city. On June 18, 1034, retail traders found themselves unable to sell their previously easy-to-find tulip bulbs. They continued to lower the prices, only to hear at lunchtime that the major merchants' guilds had begun shipping large quantities. The guilds were purchasing at wholesale prices, which, even if they didn't make a profit, were still cheaper than the retail traders' cost. Those who believed the bulb prices were merely technical adjustments bought directly from them. By 4 p.m., retail traders had moved from breaking even to breaking even, and soon after, the merchants followed suit, causing prices to continue to fall. Count Ranko had lost interest in negotiating with Frederick. He instructed his attendants to constantly inquire about market prices and drew a chart. The steadily declining red bars represented a shocking disappearance of vast wealth. He pulled a wax-sealed silver bottle from his pocket and placed it beside the table, instructing Frederick to help him put a piece of the jar in his mouth if he felt any pain in his chest. Frederick thought for a moment, then tentatively asked, "Has your family invested in tulips?" Count Ranka nodded, his face darkening. "We bought quite a few contracts last month." He then asked his attendant to bring a wooden box containing several contracts for delivery in 3 days. Seeing the price chart showing that the prices of several tulip bulbs had nearly halved, Frederick shook his head and said, "Well, let's just treat it like a house fire." Count Ranko replied dejectedly, "This money is a loan 5,000 florins, an unsecured line of credit." Frederick blinked. This was the same service the Wessenland Bank offered to the nobles of the Rhine Confederation. These days, they were the only ones offering low-interest, limited, unsecured loans. This was a publicity stunt to win over their supporters. "It doesn't matter," he shook his head. "It's only 5,000 gold coins, a small amount." Count Ranka immediately asked nervously, "You don't have to pay it back." Frederick smiled and shook his head. "If I forgive the debt now, someone will accuse you of abusing your power and selling out the royal interests in the subsequent negotiations, so I should force you to pay back the money as soon as possible." To say the Ranka family couldn't repay the 5,000 florins was a joke. They might not have had that much liquidity, but they could easily repay the debt by selling off unimportant items from their warehouses. That was the legacy of an established family. Count Ranka simply muttered, just like the Venetians, and then stopped talking about it. The Venetian description of callous moneylenders was popularized by the play Cutting a Piece of Meat, edited by Frederick. The brief confrontation ended without Count Ranka achieving his goal. He planned to negotiate with Frederick to forgive his debt, then lower it to the original price under the pretext of repaying a debt of gratitude, appearing to have given up a lot of money. By the time dinner began, the prices of several varieties of tulips in which Count Ranka's family had invested had halved, and the prices of other varieties had fallen to 40% to 60% of their previous morning prices. The Amstel city government urgently issued a decree prohibiting the sale of tulips between sunset and sunrise, and simultaneously extended invitations to all major chambers of commerce to attend the ball tonight. The Dawn Chamber of Commerce naturally got the invitation. When Choupahier delivered the invitation, Frederick asked him, "Have Mrs. Franken and her group been arranged?" Choupahier replied, "They have been arranged on Baron Adokin's warship and are already leaving the port as planned. Today's turmoil has a very bad impact. Mrs. Franken, who took the lead in lowering the price, will definitely be dealt with," so Frederick arranged for her to run away. Of course, this is not free. Frederick took a look at the invitation and asked Count Rank with interest, "Are you interested in seeing how the gentlemen here deal with this crisis?" Count Rank shook his head and said, "It is not easy for us to reveal our identities. It's not that I don't want to go, but I don't want to reveal my identity. That would be easy. Just put on a wig, change clothes, and put on some makeup, and pretend to be Albus Dumbledore, a scholar invited by the Dawn Chamber of Commerce to appraise treasures. The young man next to me is student Tom Riddle. Lulu will also be attending the ball tonight, and Frederick is eager to dress her up beautifully, but she's known for her preference for casual, easy-to-move-in clothing, so she doesn't have an evening gown." At 8 o'clock in the evening, the auditorium of the city hall was bustling with activity. In addition to local chambers of commerce, many from the Kingdom of Gaul attended the ball, as did a number of pagan merchants from the Kingdom of Anglia, the Rhine Confederation, and the Dark Lands of the North. Choupahier and Lulu greeted familiar chamber presidents and met new ones. Business is about connections, and regular accumulation is paramount. At a table in the corner, Count Rank seemed to be sipping wine casually, but in reality, a faint white light shone in his ears, allowing him to hear every voice in the hall. Before the official speeches before the ball officially began, he told Frederick, "The city government plans to buy a large number of tulip bulbs tomorrow morning at a price 50% higher than yesterday. In order to drive up prices." He sounded relaxed. If he could seize this opportunity to sell his family's tulip contracts, he wouldn't owe Frederick any money and could even make a profit. "It seems to be working well," Count Ranka continued. "Many merchants are willing to follow the city government's lead." After he finished speaking, he noticed that Frederick frowned slightly, seemingly lost in thought. Frederick, also listening to the conversation in the auditorium, said in a deep voice, "Something's wrong. You know, Duke Wesson predicted a collapse in the tulip market in his recently published The Nature and Study of Wealth. With the speed of telegraph transmission today, this information should have reached us, but I haven't heard anyone mention it." Count Ranka, upon his reminder, also noticed the problem. Having held a high position for so many years, he quickly understood. He said expressionlessly, "Perhaps others thought the prediction was nonsense and unnecessary, so they didn't waste the money to pass it on. There is another possibility. Someone has blocked the news." Frederick was too lazy to pay attention to the first possibility. He pinched his chin and said, "No one can block the telegraph station. The telegraph station in Amstel has shares in people of Duke Wesson. If such a thing happens, it will definitely be reported to Duke Wesson. Who knows?" Count Rank smiled. "Maybe someone blocked the telegraph station in Weissenberg without the Duke Wesson's knowledge. It seems that the Duke Wesson's territory is not as stable as imagined." Frederick curled his lips. His control over the territory was both top-down and bottom-up. Financial, military, and personnel powers were all firmly in his hands. Government orders could be passed down to the village level, and there were no threats such as inheritance disputes. There was no breeding ground for rebellion. "This kind of thing can't happen in Wesson." He shook his head. "No one can silently control the telegraph station." Frederick's words finally stopped uncertainly. Count Rank immediately focused his attention. It seemed that there was a force hidden within Wesson that could interfere with his administration. If he could find and use it, it would benefit the royal family. Just now, Frederick remembered that there was indeed someone in the territory who could command the entire Wesson, as if I were here in person in the event of a major incident that he was unable to handle. This power was granted when he decided to travel after the recovery of Constantinople, and he didn't take it back after his return because of the impending war. He was sure that when he returned to investigate, he would find the relevant documents on the second to last or third to last sheets of paper in the last box of the half-meter-high document box. The ball was about to begin, and more people were entering the auditorium. Shupai and Lu also returned to their table to take a break. At this time, the waiter's roll call at the door attracted the attention of many people. The president of the Sea Flame Chamber of Commerce, Shupai, was surprised. Why did this person show up at this time? Many people had the same idea as him. In recent years, this Chamber of Commerce has been very popular in the Tulip Circle, but the president has never appeared. Unexpectedly, he suddenly appeared today. A lady who looked about 30 years old soon walked in from outside. She was wearing a green evening dress and a pearl hairnet on her head. She had a round figure and her skin was pale and a little sickly. A local big businessman at the table next to him whispered to his friends around him, "I heard that the city lord personally went to invite the chief commercial officer of their Chamber of Commerce this afternoon." "I didn't expect the president to come in person," another businessman said. "They have a lot of goods. It is said that many of them are stocks from 3 years ago. The trial planting sprouted last month." At Frederick's table, everyone except Count Rank was stunned. They didn't expect that the president of the Maritime Flame Chamber of Commerce was actually Altasha. Altasha was defeated and captured in the 6 Days Defense in 1026 and then worked as a servant for Frederick for a while. She washed him like a winter melon and later taught him the basics of summoning. After the Battle of the Elbe in 1027, Frederick obtained the southern part of Cod Island in the negotiations. Altasha's territory was in the north, and then he went back to help mine fire magic crystals there. In recent years, Lulu had met her several times when she accompanied Baronadikin to Cod Island, and Shupaya had also met her several times because of the transportation of fire magic crystals from Cod Island to Wesson State, so they all knew each other. I see. Frederick understood that Artisha was not only the princess of the Green Island Kingdom, but also a member of the Witch Sisterhood, and Psyche had a good relationship with this mysterious organization. It seemed that the two sides had joined forces, with Psyche tampering with the radio station in Wesson State to block the news. The Witch Sisterhood made a fortune in the tulip market, and maybe he would get a share of the dividends in the end. So he whispered, "Stay as far away from anything related to her as possible. If she means well but ends up doing something bad, you'll be doomed." But the development of things was beyond Frederick's expectations. Artisha did not come here to engage in any of the overt and covert struggles in business war novels, but chose to kill other people's money trees with boiling water. Haven't you heard? Duke Wesson predicted long ago that the price of tulips would collapse like a broken house, so we cleared the goods at a low price. The mayor of Amstel was stunned for a moment, and asked cautiously and tentatively, "Which Duke Wesson is it?" Altasha said as a matter of course, "It could be any other Duke of Wesson, the one who rented a lot of swampland here and reclaimed it for farmland, the city lord, the surrounding officials, the nobles of the Kingdom of Gaul, and the big merchants all broke out in cold sweats." Count Rank was more involved in academia than business, so he didn't know the status Frederick held in the hearts of merchants. All of Frederick's business-related statements in the Wesson Daily were studied letter by them, even though the priests in the church didn't study the scriptures that seriously. Especially since Frederick had recently published a declaration in the White Stork Times to fight for the merchants, his status had further increased. Duke Wesson said that tulips were doomed, and that was probably true. When the city lord personally ran over to verify this with Shupahia and Lulu, his legs were shaking and his words were incoherent. Shupahia said calmly, "Duke Wesson said a few years ago that the tulip market had gone astray. It was not a normal commercial trade, and the prices of goods far exceeded their own value. That's why the Dawn Chamber of Commerce has never participated in the tulip trade." Those who had dealt with the Dawn Chamber of Commerce suddenly recalled that Shupahia and Lulu had indeed not touched the tulip trade in all those years, and had secretly scoffed at it back then. As if orchestrated, several people arrived at the auditorium. They were all managers from the major chambers of commerce. After whispering something in the president's ear, the president's face suddenly paled. News from Wesson State arrived precisely on time. Duke Wesson, in his book The Nature and Study of Wealth, published on June 14, predicted a precipitous drop in tulip prices. The merchants immediately left, one after another, rushing back to clear their inventory. The entrance to the auditorium was blocked, and one unfortunate individual even fell and broke a rib. The ball was cancelled. In less than a quarter of an hour, the only people left in the auditorium were Frederick and his friends, who hadn't participated in the event, and Altisha, who had already cleared out her inventory. Altisha didn't come over to speak to Frederick and the others, but simply nodded politely before leaving. When the sun rose again, the situation was completely out of control. Count Ranke's tulips, worth about 8,000 florins on June 17, were worth only 4,000 by the evening of the 18th. On the morning of the 19th, he couldn't sell 3,000 florins. Near dusk, a merchant finally bought them for 250 florins. They immediately loaded their goods onto a ship and sailed overnight, rushing to the Kingdom of Pius to recover their losses before word of the incident spread. This merchant's sentiments were shared by many others, and for a period of time, many winged hussar horses suffered diarrhea from eating tulip bulbs. News of the plummeting tulip prices quickly spread via radio, impacting Gulf first. Tulip sales began across the country, so much so that members of the Gallic trade delegation, preparing to depart for Wesson after a wedding banquet in Cologne, crowded the telegraph booth, and even little Louis was so frightened that he broke his teacup. The disturbance soon spread to the Rhine Confederation, the Kingdom of Anglet, the Kingdom of Sardinia and other places. For a time, the coffin shops and churches were too busy to cope, and the priests presiding over the funerals had to work overtime. Chapter 366, continuing to develop. 4 centuries after Frederick's grave began to grow weeds, a common topic among historians seeking to defraud funding and falsify academic titles was the mastermind behind the Amstel riots of June 26, 1034. These riots, which swept across the Low Countries and triggered a chain reaction due to the tulip bubble, ultimately transformed the region's political ecology and influenced its future political landscape. Many scholars, drawing on the court records of the time, believe that the riots were sparked by the anger of bankrupt citizens after the tulip bubble burst, with no hidden forces at all. Instead, the Gallic Chamber of Commerce, which was severely impacted, was the culprit behind the bubble. Some scholars, seizing Frederick's presence at the scene and the ultimate beneficiary, believe he was the mastermind. However, this view is quickly refuted. Count Ranke's later memoirs, compiled by his granddaughter Marlene von Ranke, clearly document the actions of both individuals, showing that Frederick was also startled after the riots, seemingly unpretentious. Over 200 years later, a new perspective emerged. This stemmed from an old diary purchased in an old bookstore in the Kingdom of Anglia. The original owner was a baron whose father had handled shady matters for the king during that period, and whose family had fallen on hard times decades earlier. 20 years after the riots, the diary's owner heard from his father that the king had sent him and a group of others to Amstel immediately after the tulip bubble burst, primarily to exploit the situation and incite conflict between the Low Countries and the Kingdom of Gaul. Frederick, unaware of the conflicting accounts of this incident, simply refused to effeminate himself. As soon as the first plume of smoke rose from the city, he immediately fled with Lou in his arms. On the 26th, the price of tulips had dropped to 10% of what it had been on the 17th. Citizens demanded a refund from the Chamber of Commerce, but were unsuccessful. The argument erupted into a brawl, which soon devolved into looting and burning. City government had been paralyzed, and even many officers in the city defense force had left their barracks to deal with their tulips. When the fire broke out, no one organized to put out the fire. The city was crumbling, children were wailing, friends were no longer friends, homes were no longer homes. Frederick had reclaimed much of the marshland here, and the group fled to a farm on the coast dozens of kilometers from Amstel, far from the turmoil. Even the Flying Tulip urgently set sail and docked at the farm's fishing pier. Count Ranke, finally recovering from the loss of 4,750 florins, arrived at the farm, curious about the sailless ship. Led by his first mate, Alfred, he spent a day touring the farm and postponed the start of the negotiations. It was already July, and the wheat here ripened later than in Wesson, with harvest not until a month later. Frederick and Count Ranke walked along the wheat fields, the sea breeze rippling the grain like waves. They looked like they were chatting, not negotiating. Count Ranke offered reassurance from the outset, as Frederick stated that, in theory, he would not pursue independence. Frederick had carefully considered that the development of his domain depended on markets and sources of raw materials, Other empty titles were irrelevant. The benefits of staying within the Rhine Confederation were obvious. Key coal mines lay here, and iron ore from the dark lands of the north had to pass through. Wool, flax, and grain could also be obtained from here, significantly reducing diplomatic costs. Within the Rhine Confederation, the royal family held the largest territory, representing a market ripe for further development. Frederick proposed, "The royal territory and my territory are mutually exempt from all customs duties and tolls. The citizens of both sides are allowed to enter each other's territory and are allowed to reside, travel and do business throughout the territory. The citizens, chambers of commerce and groups of both sides will enjoy the same legal and tax treatment as the citizens of the other side when residing and doing business in the other side's territory. The citizens, chambers of commerce and groups of both sides will not be allowed to illegally enter or intrude on their residences, warehouses, factories, shops and other business premises, as well as all ancillary premises, in the other side's territory. The caravans, ships and aircraft of both sides may pass freely through any towns, ports, villages, open waters and roads opened by the other side, and the personnel and goods have the right to pass through the other side's territory by the most convenient route. The caravans, ships and aircraft of both sides may enter the towns, ports, villages and other places of the other side for shelter when encountering any danger." After hearing this, Count Rank became alert and asked, "The royal territory is larger than yours and has a larger population. What do you want by giving up such a huge benefit?" Frederick's expression remained calm, as he reflected that Count Rank seemed to believe that opening their territories to trade would benefit the more powerful royal family. On paper, this was indeed the case. In terms of area, population, and total grain production, the royal domains were indeed superior to Frederick's. Seeing this was the case, Frederick agreed to follow his lead, holding up 5 fingers and saying, "I will provide this much exemption from military service to the royal family every year." According to feudal obligations, Frederick was theoretically required to fight offensive battles for a month and a half each year, and defensive battles until the enemy retreated. Not wanting his troops to be wasted, he was willing to spend 5,000 florins a year in lieu of actual combat. Count Ranka pondered for a few minutes, then nodded. "You don't have an heir yet, so it's indeed inconvenient for you to go to war, but 500 florins is too little, at least 3,000, don't bargain. I know you have plenty of money and can afford it, and the annual assistance payment will be the same amount." Frederick was silent for a moment, then nodded. There were political interests beyond economics, so Frederick said, "Let me maintain my appointment as Chancellor of Finance." Count Ranka agreed. In his roughly 7 years as Chancellor of Finance, Frederick had issued only one order, appointing Rudolf to the position with full powers. Rudolf was now performing well, aided by a group of veteran ministers. Frederick continued, "I want 2 more ministerial positions." Count Ranka perked up, thinking this was the moment of truth. This was the real benefit he was seeking. They had previously researched and speculated that Frederick would likely request the position of Minister of War, possibly the President of the Privy Council, the King's Advisory and Correspondence Office, or the position of Lord Keeper of the Seal, the position that held the King's personal seal and carried out supervisory authority. The royal family and the court's top brass believed that the position of Minister of War was out of the question, but that the positions of President of the Privy Council and Lord Keeper of the Seal were something they could consider. Frederick declared solemnly, "I want the posts of Minister of Posts and Minister of the Navy." Count Ranka paused. He understood the Minister of the Navy, but the Minister of Posts, bewildered, reminded him, "Those 2 positions don't exist at court." Frederick smiled brightly, "That's perfect. It won't take away from others. Well, there's no need for an office, just hang a sign on the door. By the way, let's add a Minister of the Air Force." Count Ranka, caught off guard by the unexpected offer, replied, "Adding new ministers isn't easy." Frederick replied, "That's all right. I'll give you my proposal later. You can take it back to Cologne and study it." These 3 positions weren't random, nor were they meant to be paid for nothing. The post of Minister of Posts was meant to build a comprehensive postal system across the Rhine Confederation, extending telegraph stations down to the town level, expediting the flow of information and goods, and allowing people to send money home without worrying about leaving their jobs. The posts of Minister of the Navy and Minister of the Air were easier to understand. They were simply shell companies going public to save him money. So he had the scribes in his territory write a pound-weight proposal for each position, hiding their true purpose amidst the nonsense, making the lords think they were simply seeking a white-collar salary and a token grant to maintain appearances. Count Ranka could figure out the trick with time, but what they lacked now was time. If the negotiations were delayed for a long time and Frederick didn't show up, rumors like murder to silence witnesses might circulate. Chapter 367, A Small Step for the Pioneer. Emperors and generals have their own open and covert struggles, while ordinary people have their own lives. In early July, while Frederick was waiting on his farm for a response from the city of Cologne, the village of Chestnut was packed with visitors. The village had built a spacious wooden house specifically for the steam tractor, and today, the large gate was packed with people, and a 3-headed dog was running around the 100-horsepower steam tractor. Angela was so nervous that she was about to cry. The Duke of Wessen's fiancée, Maria von Ertl, was standing nearby. Behind her was the Minister of Administration, Frick. Behind Frick stood the Governor of Wesson, Ahmed. Next to them was Walter, the president of the Wesson Daily newspaper and Frederick's grammar, rhetoric, and logic teacher. Last month, Angela's registration for tractor training had been featured in the newspaper. Frederick had seen it and reserved a front-page headline for her in the press release he left behind before leaving. The newspaper articles written by Frederick himself were all about policy and direction. For years, the only person to personally write a headline about a specific individual was a reformed thief. The top leader took it seriously, the higher-ups took it even more seriously, the middle management took it especially seriously, and the lower-level officials were trembling with fear. Angela had received the notice the day before, and having not slept well last night, she realized she had forgotten her pen when she started work today. Maria, watching her hand tremble as she held the clipboard, took out her own pen and handed it to her, whispering, "Don't worry. Since you already have a tractor driver's license, you'll be fine." "I didn't even pass the test." Angela suddenly felt as if her soul had taken a hot bath on a snowy day, warm and cozy. Her anxiety and restlessness instantly vanished. Almight, a man of great experience, sighed inwardly. Miss Ertl had quietly cast a spell to calm Angela, demonstrating her formidable mastery of soul magic. Angela nodded to Maria and clipped her pen to a clipboard, which she slung across her body like a shoulder bag. Attached to the clipboard were the pre- and post-use inspection logs for the tractor and harvester. Boiler water level normal, water tank level normal, lubricating oil cup level normal, sufficient magic crystal energy, no condensation in the steam pipes and cylinders, key screws intact, valves opening and closing properly, chain tightness normal, flywheel and gears rotating properly. Angela noted each item on the log, reaffirming the tractor's integrity. She then turned on the water and began inspecting the harvester. The power wheel, drive gears, and chain were all functioning properly, the wheat wheel was rotating properly, and the double-layer serrations had been removed and polished 2 days prior. The conveyor belt was also functioning properly. The harvester was now in transport mode, the connecting frame already attached to the hook behind the tractor. The needle on the boiler's pressure gauge gradually moved from the yellow zone to the middle of the green zone. Angela opened the steam supply valve, and scorching steam rushed into the pipes, traveling all the way to the cylinders, forcing open the pistons that were hindering its expansion. The flywheel spun rapidly, and the steam engine emitted a rhythmic hum. Ahmed asked everyone in the warehouse to leave, and those at the door to clear the way. Maria waited at the edge of the wheat field, then curiously asked Ahmed, "Why hasn't Angela come out yet?" Ahmed replied, "After starting the machine, it must run without load for a quarter of an hour to ensure there are no problems before it can be used." It's almost time. Not long after 3 whistles, Angela drove out in a tractor, turning perfectly on the road and stopping at the roadside in the corner of the wheat field. Several farmers and women immediately went over and, under Angela's direction, loaded the harvester towed behind. The village chief directed several horse-drawn and mule-drawn carts to park nearby. Several people were ready to transport the wheat once it was harvested. Everything was ready, and with a long whistle, the tractor slowly moved forward. The harvester's wheels began to turn, providing power. A 3-meter-long plowing wheel pulled the wheat forward, while a serrated blade shifted left and right below it, severing the stalks. The chopped wheat fell onto a canvas conveyor belt, then onto the left side, where it landed in the bucket behind the horse-drawn cart. Someone on the cart caught the falling wheat and arranged it so that the stalks and ears were aligned. The driver on the horse-drawn cart adjusted the relative positions for easier loading. Once the cart was full, the driver erected a barrier at one end of the conveyor belt to block the wheat and told the driver to hurry. When the next cart arrived, the driver opened the barrier. Angela carefully maintained the tractor's speed, a constant one except for a slight slowdown when switching carts. Too slow would affect efficiency, and too fast would hinder the cart's ability to keep up. A seemingly dejected man stood by the vegetable patch over 100 meters away, watching his daughter intently work on the tractor from afar, a rare smile on his face. Frick had walked over at some point and, like two farmers joking with each other, kicked the man on the butt. He whispered, "Your family is lucky. Considering your father was a soldier under my command, take the exam this year and I'll arrange for you to become village chief in my new territory before I retire." As the Minister of Administration, it was no problem for him to arrange for the son of an old subordinate who had made meritorious service to become village chief. However, Frederick now required that anyone who became village chief must pass an exam. At the very least, he couldn't be a slob who didn't know about farming. Although the man had been punished by Frederick, it had been so long that he probably didn't remember it, and the Administrative Council had no relevant records. Furthermore, the story of knowing shame and encourage fit the current propaganda, so as long as he passed the exam, he would have room for maneuver. Frick would retire in a few years, and this favor might be passed on to his descendants. In the wheat fields, the tractor quickly harvested its way through. Angela breathed a sigh of relief and began to turn clockwise to harvest the other side. The people in the surrounding villages breathed a sigh of relief as well. Since conscription had affected everyone, no one was driving the tractors. Now someone was available, and they could ask her to help with the harvest at the end of the month. Someone found Angela's mother, and she was all smiles as she negotiated wages. "Wesson curses," she snapped. "Why is my daughter being paid less than the other men driving tractors? Is she driving slower, or did she dig a ditch? Since the work is the same, if you want to hire my daughter, you have to pay her the same price as the men, including lunch and a pork knuckle." She looked at Walter, who was watching the fun, and asked, "Newspaper sir, don't you agree?" Walter had covered a lot of news about hiring people for work during the busy season and had some understanding of market prices. Men had always been paid more than women. He initially thought it was normal that Angela was paid less than the other male tractor drivers, but then he realized that the wage difference between men and women was due to differences in physical strength, which led to differences in the amount of work produced. If physical strength no longer affected the results of labor, then there shouldn't be any difference in wages based on results either. Walter, a renowned rhetorician and logician, used elegant rhetoric and impeccable logic to explain to Angela's mother and the others that Angela's wages should be the same as other male tractor drivers. The farmers didn't understand. By the time Walter finished explaining, Angela had already harvested half the wheat field. Angela's mother said, "Oh, we understand if you mean piecework, like cross-stitching, so, for the same amount of land, whether men or women, the price is the same, right?" Walter felt hurt, thinking his words were worthy of inclusion in a textbook on rhetoric and logic. But they didn't understand. The news outline Frederick had left behind included a section on other people's opinions about Angela, which Walter needed to collect and fill in on the spot. So, he put it on the front page. And then the state of Wesson was in uproar. In mid-July, when Frederick returned to Wessenberg after completing the negotiations, he found the newspapers and magazines engulfed in controversy. The battleground was threefold: whether women could work outside the home like men, whether men and women should receive equal pay for the same work, and whether peasants can understand was a new direction for rhetoric. The debate was so intense that Frederick saw many familiar names, even foreign emperors and princesses. Chapter 368 Huge Investment. While Angela had just received her tractor driver's license and had yet to return to Chestnut Village, Frederick was on his farm by the sea, his head aching. Lulu planned to take the Flying Tulip to a nearby river for a few days. A ship sailing at sea inevitably accumulates many organisms on its bottom. A short stay in fresh water would kill them, making scraping the bottom much easier. The Flying Tulip was to be scraped in Amstel after its bottom was scraped, and then proceeded to the shipyard in Wesson for a comprehensive inspection and repairs, providing valuable experience for the armed merchant ship currently under design. However, Amstel had just experienced a devastating disaster. A fire ignited by riots, fueled by the incessant northwest winds, had burned down much of the city, reducing the once famous Pearl of the Sea to charcoal in the mud. Survivors scavenged the ruins of their former homes for usable items, many using unburned wood to support rags as shelter. The church organized a manual burial operation for the victims, and the riverside shipyard was transformed into a coffin factory, brightly lit at night. The city's lords and the powerful Gallic nobles had long since fled, vanishing without a trace. Now, the affairs of the city were handled by the presidents of the local chambers of commerce and the priests of the church. Lulu directed the Dawn Chamber of Commerce to intercept several ships carrying grain to Wesson. Through expedited telegrams, the ship owners were ordered to deliver the grain, barely ensuring that no one would starve. Frederick remained silent, leaving all matters to Lulu and Shupahia. Unexpectedly, the fire would eventually come back to haunt him. Shupahia was incredibly nervous as he handed a document to the big boss, sweat beads on his forehead like a cold drink fresh from the refrigerator on a hot day. Frederick shuddered at the first glance. One of the Dawn Chamber of Commerce's main businesses was marine insurance. 2 years ago, they began to expand into urban fire insurance, also in Amstel. When promoting the business, there were promotions like free home fire insurance with purchases of ship insurance, cargo insurance, and seafarer life insurance, as well as free eggs or cooking oil with purchases of insurance. Frederick's reputation was strong, and many people bought in. Unexpectedly, the Amstel fire hit. The fire losses have now been tallied, and a rough statistical table for the leadership is on the first page of the document. 3- and 4-story wooden houses for ordinary civilians cost an average of 5 florins each, totaling 3,680. Refined houses for ordinary merchants and others cost an average of 30 florins each, totaling 1,125. Houses with courtyards cost an average of 90 florins each, totaling 360. Small mansions for the less wealthy cost an average of 150 florins each, totaling 18. 2- to 3-room shops or workshops with storefronts, warehouses, or work areas cost an average of 15 florins each, totaling 868. Large tiled warehouses cost an average of 50 florins each, totaling 512. There was also an accounting school and a literacy school, each costing an average of 300 florins. In total, the Dawn Chamber of Commerce was required to pay 126,470 florins in compensation, which, rounded up, equaled 443 kilograms of gold, a little more than 4 years' income for the Confederation of the Rhine royal family. Even Frederick frowned. The Dawn Chamber of Commerce boasts high profits, but its annual contributions and reserves are substantial. Furthermore, it must invest in radio and telegraph stations in various ports, making it impossible to cover these costs alone. Forced withdrawals would lead to a breakdown in its entire funding chain and eventual bankruptcy. The Wesson family's income, including returns from its investments and taxes on the Wesson canton, has always been kept secret, fearing potential shock. Simply put, last year's revenue was approximately 10 times that of the Confederation of the Rhine royal family, 95% of which went to Wesson cantonal government expenditures, and 5% remained with the Wesson family. Frederick, embracing the principle that circulating gold is money, annually spends large amounts of gold on infrastructure, scientific research, and support for struggling painters to boost economic development. The remaining gold reserves are modest. Wesson, having just experienced the recapture of Constantinople last year, has yet to recoup its profits, necessitating the issuance of a special bond of 150,000 florins this year to finance the war effort and initiate subsequent infrastructure road construction. Frederick calculated that it would be impossible to withdraw such a large sum of money in a short period of time without affecting the financial health of the country. Now was the time for post-war spending. Take advantage of Peter to pay Paul would only lead to the collapse of everything. While the treasuries of the Grand Dukes of Franconia and Regens and others held valuable items for sale, the tulip scandal was only the beginning. The implications were widespread, and it was unclear how much surplus grain the landowners would have. By then, there would be more people showing up to support the farmers than paying for them. The most important task now was to secure enough cash to pay for the fire damage by July. Otherwise, his reputation would plummet, and he would have no chance of recovery. Shupahia reminded Frederick, the wheat, golden beans, pumpkins, and Elizabeth potatoes on the farm are about to be harvested. After delivery in August, we should be able to earn about 10,000 florins. We can ask the buyer to pay in advance. Frederick's farm, reclaimed from swampland, was a major grain depot for the Wesson canton. The buyer was the Wesson cantonal government and a chamber of commerce run by its vassals, so advance payment was a simple matter. But he didn't react. He simply sat on the sofa, picked up his teacup, slowly sipped it, and concentrated on thinking about countermeasures. Record the order, Frederick suddenly gave the order in a deep voice, and Shupaia immediately took out his notebook to record it. Frederick said, using the tax revenue of the Wesson state government for 10 years from 1035 to 1044 as collateral, the Wesson Bank issued 200,000 florins of disaster relief bonds with a term of 3 years and an annual interest rate of 5%. Among them, 60,000 florins of bonds were sold in Wayne, the capital of the Osmagian Empire. 50,000 florins of bonds were sold in Cologne, 40,000 florins were sold in Paris, the capital of the Kingdom of Gaul, and the last 30,000 florins were sold in Londinium, the capital of the Kingdom of Anglia. The rest were purchased internally by the Wesson Bank, cancel all contracts of all farms in the lowlands with outside the region, compensate according to the contract, and sell at normal prices after the harvest, starting tomorrow. All grain sold to Wesson State passing through here will be delivered here, and we will continue to run soup kitchens with the church, talk to Wesson State and ship a batch of winter clothes, quilts and medicines over, and the church will distribute them. After he finished speaking, he sighed. His original plan to acquire local assets when the tulip bubble burst could not go ahead. Unexpectedly, it eventually turned into disaster relief. Shupaia repeated his leader's instructions and left, his earlier nervousness gone. He was no longer nervous. Count Ranka had been listening nearby, and upon hearing that Frederick was issuing 200,000 florins in bonds, he instinctively pulled out the small silver bottle of heart medicine. After calming himself by drinking half a glass of juice, Count Ranka said, "Wesson, you don't need to invest so much money here. Raising taxes in the new territory could easily lead to riots." The amount Frederick had raised exceeded the insurance claims by almost 3 years' worth of royal revenue. Furthermore, this territory was a dependency of the Kingdom of Gaul, and its development would only serve to benefit others. Furthermore, the 200,000 florin bonds, not to mention the principal, would earn 10,000 florins per year at 5% interest. Count Ranka and his men had previously estimated that the annual revenue of the Wesson state was around 20,000 florins, a significant loss. Count Ranka believed that Frederick would have to resort to scraping the land to fill such a huge hole. Frederick pinched his chin and asked him, "You said that I have done so many good things and donated some money, can I get a title and a territory?" Count Rank was speechless. It was not that he was afraid that he would surrender to the enemy. It was not surprising that a noble had a title and a territory in a foreign country because of family marriage and the extinction of distant relatives. But was it necessary to do so at the expense of comforting his base? Frederick continued to ponder, casually picking up a notepad beside him and writing as he said, "I plan to inject some vitality into the city of Amstel, such as custom making the hulls of 20 merchant ships that do not require sails." "No," Count Rank jumped up. "Ship without sails must be top secret and cannot be leaked." Frederick smiled and said, "Over the years, I don't know how many people have imitated our steam engines, and I don't know how many people have been killed. The few that can run don't have as much power as ours, but they are much larger in size. Let's not talk about anything else, just look at the valves on our steam engines. So far, no one has been able to make a barely acceptable one. They either leak or have a short lifespan, and they are also extremely expensive. We have a factory that specializes in the production and research of these steam valves. The boss spent over 7,000 florins in 3 years to make qualified valves. In the end, they made better ones than the steam engine factory. The steam engine factory used part of its valve production to invest in the valve factory at a discount. Machinery technology is constantly evolving, and our old steam engines are becoming obsolete, so we've been selling them cheap lately in preparation for better ones. Truth be told, the flying tulip became obsolete a month ago. This time, we'll undergo a complete refit, and from it, we'll build a fleet capable of dominating the entire ocean." Count Ranko was startled by his plan, and suddenly understood why he needed the title of Minister of the Navy. Suddenly, he felt a burning coal in his heart, decades cold, reigniting. "If you want territory here, spend your money in the Kingdom of Gaul." Count Ranka, for some reason, began to offer Frederick advice. "You'd better go to Paris and make some friends. There's also England, Denmark, and even the pagan dark lands and green islands to the north. If you want to dominate the North Sea, you'll need to at least establish a reputation among those nations. I have some friends there who I can introduce you to, as a stepping stone to your position." Chapter 369 An Unexpected Repayment. Is there anything more delightful than waking up to a gift of money? On the day Angela first drove a tractor to harvest wheat in Chestnut Village, Artisha arrived just in time for breakfast, accompanied by a veteran of the Wesson family. Jess, the chief commercial officer of the Sea Flame Chamber of Commerce, was Janus, the former Minister of Commerce of Wesson State. He had a promising future, but he became a protector for the underworld in Wessenberg. Instead of being executed, he was exiled to Cod Island to dig for magic crystals. Frederick smiled at Ardisha and said, "Your Highness, I haven't seen you for 7 years. You seem to be doing well." Ardisha, now much plumper than before, her figure a pearl, said to Frederick, "How many years have passed in the blink of an eye? I knew you'd be great, but I never imagined you'd become this great." Frederick looked at Janus and said calmly, "Janus, you've done a great job these past few years. I have a big plan. If you do well, I can give your son a knighthood." Frederick had stripped Janus of some of his political rights in a fit of rage after discovering he was acting as a shield for the underworld. He had no intention of restoring them, but he wasn't against giving the reward to his beloved son. Janus's face flushed with excitement, and he immediately stood up and said, "I am willing to continue serving you, sir." Frederick simply gestured for him to sit down. Breakfast arrived: bread, jam, fried eggs, and the newly popular boiled fish balls in Wesson. This kind of fish balls is very simple to make. Prepare the ingredients. Use a meatball tongs exported from Wesson to reach into the ingredients and clamp them. The 2 semicircles on the top of the tongs will press out a fish ball. If you have good skills, you can even make double-layer meatballs. While eating, Ardisha said, "I came to see you today for something." The Sea Flame Chamber of Commerce was disbanded yesterday, Lulu asked in surprise. "Sister Ardisha, aren't you the president? Why did you disband it? Did you encounter any trouble?" Ardisha smiled mysteriously and replied, "This Chamber of Commerce is just one of the many shell chambers of commerce we have. It has been used to gather goods and funds in the tulip market over the years. Now that the tulip business is over, its mission is completed. Now the funds are dispersed and transferred through other shell chambers of commerce. It will be disbanded after completion." 6 years ago, Master Psyche asked you to borrow some money. She said she would pay you back tenfold within 10 years, so your part of about 150,000 gold shields is now in the Sami Alliance and can be transferred at any time. It is all legal money and the source cannot be traced. Frederick has worked hard on international trade. The gold shield is one of the more popular gold coins in the Darkland in the north. There is a shield pattern on the front and the gold content is 1.8 grams. Converted into a florin gold coin with a gold content of 3.5 grams, it is equivalent to about 80,000 florins. He estimated in his mind that, excluding his own share, Psyche and the Witch Sisterhood had earned at least 500,000 florins from the tulip business in recent years. Frederick hadn't known what Psyche was borrowing the money for, and he hadn't expected it to arrive at this time. After some thought, he said, "Let's transfer this money to the Dawn Chamber of Commerce." He then told Shupaya, "Once the money arrives, use it along with the chamber's existing funds to repay the housing claim. A portion will be used as an interest-free loan for 5 years, and a low-interest loan after 5 years. For personal reconstruction, I'll have someone send you the blueprints later to order an additional 100 inland vessels and build a large fish cannery. I'll send the personnel." He then told Artaxia and Janus, "I plan to further cooperate with the Dark Land, particularly the iron ore of the Sami Alliance and the Kingdom of Spheria. That's our most urgently needed resource. To improve efficiency, I plan to establish an ore processing plant there. I plan to have Janus contact the local nobles. Princess Artaxia, I want to seek your help." Janus immediately expressed her loyalty, but Artaxia shook her head and said, "Really? I thought we'd catch up after all these years, but it turned into a meeting. You're assigning me work before I even finish breakfast." Frederick smiled sheepishly and said, "We'll be returning to Weissenberg the day after tomorrow. The royal court has approved my terms, and the investiture ceremony will be held there on the spring equinox next year. I've been arranging work for the past 2 days," Ardisha said, somewhat helplessly. "I'm truly impressed. I was just going to see if you've been diligently practicing the summoning techniques I taught you these past few years." Frederick scratched his head and sighed, "I don't have a natural talent for summoning. I haven't even gotten to the beginning yet," Ardisha said with a smug expression. "HMPH, it seems you're not as skilled as the rumors say." The conversation in the restaurant shifted to Ardisha asking about Frederick's recent life, as his legends had spread to Green Island. After breakfast, Frederick still had some work to do. He needed to develop his maritime power, but Weissenberg alone wouldn't be enough. The seaman's school could train sailors, but it couldn't mass-produce experienced captains. The Low Countries had a long history of maritime trade and a wealth of maritime talent that couldn't be missed. Those seeking a living at sea had their own circle, and word spread quickly. Soon, people from Lulu's office were signing up. Lulu held up a stack of resumes and said to Frederick, John, Peter, and the others are all experienced captains. Marco, Luther, and Frank are renowned captains. There's no place on the sea the three of them wouldn't dare venture together. Dennis and Arjun are captains who have made their mark in recent years. Frederick lifted her onto his lap, resting his chin on her shoulder and carefully reading each resume. They all look good, Frederick said after reading them all. They'll be your officers. You can take them and their crews to the Seaman's School in Wessenland to learn how to operate radios and weapons, and then to the shipyard to learn about steamships. This will be the same for all future applicants. The door opened, and Christina arrived with tea. Seeing the two men hugging, she quickly closed the door. Frederick continued unfazed. The shipyard recently developed a fairly efficient propeller to replace the paddle wheel. This time, the Flying Tulip is being refitted and then put on sea trials in the inland sea along with several other technology-verifying vessels. I promised Sir Claire a steam fishing boat near the city of La, on the Cyclops Island in the inland sea. It's also the base for sea trials. Artaxia was about to join Frederick when Christina stopped her outside the door. The Duke and the boss are inside. Artaxia smiled and said, What are you afraid of? I've seen everything when I brushed Frederick before, when he was just starting to grow hair. Christina blushed and looked at her in disbelief, wondering if the Duke liked chubby girls. Artaxia pushed open the door and walked in. Smiling, she said to the two people sitting on the same armchair, I hope I didn't interrupt you from doing your mischief. Lulu ran off, blushing. Artaxia went over to sit on another sofa, and suddenly asked Frederick with a sly smile, Do you want me to sit like her? Frederick shook his head and said, Then we need to change to an iron sofa. Cod Island is located at a high latitude and has a cold climate. The diet is meaty and fat-rich. It is now the largest importer of happy water. A few years after Artaxia returned, she weighed nearly 200 kilograms. Frederick saw the wedding ring on her sausage-like finger and asked curiously, I heard that you got married? Why didn't you tell me earlier? I didn't even send you a gift. A happy smile appeared on Artaxia's face, and she said with a smile, That idiot is the youngest child of my father's captain of the guard. He almost died when he was born. He survived but was skinny since he was a child. When he was a child, he was often bullied, and I always stood up for him. That idiot has been thinking about me. That year, Master Psyche's happy water had just been delivered to me, and he came to visit. I lied to him that it was wine from the south. It didn't taste like alcohol at first, and he started to get drunk after drinking 3 bottles. Well, that idiot drank 5.5 bottles, pretended to be drunk, and burped and said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. Frederick laughed when he heard it. After he finished speaking, Artaxia asked him, Are you planning to attack the Dark Land? We all believe in natural gods here, and we are not very friendly to you who believe in the god of light. Frederick said, Gold in the hands of pagans is still gold. You can tell everyone that I only do business and don't talk about anything else. Artaxia nodded. She was also a believer of the Church of Nature, but as a magician, she thought a lot and was not so firm in her faith, but it was hard to say about those nobles. Actually, there's a way to get them to accept you, she said. If you make significant contributions to the church, they'll grant you the title of honorary saint. Frederick raised a brow. They approached you and me for help, Artaxia replied. Yes, they started bothering me last year. I only had a moment's peace and quiet when you were in Constantinople. Now that you're back and the war's over, my ears are buzzing again. Frederick considered his leverage and asked, Printing scriptures and vegetable greenhouses? For the church, cheap scriptures held immense appeal, justifying the cost. Naturally, the church's territory was located in cold, high-altitude regions with long winters, and locals could easily fight over dehydrated and canned vegetables. It's not that they didn't buy materials to build vegetable greenhouses, but the snow was heavy there, and their imitations only resulted in the greenhouses collapsing. Artaxia said, The goal they gave me is to achieve one of them. Frederick nodded slightly, thought for a moment, and said, I can agree to both. I need them to provide samples for the scriptures. I need to study them in the greenhouse. I can't just copy and paste. Artaxia breathed a sigh of relief. Then I'll go back and give them a reply tomorrow. Chapter 370, Two More Wonders. Woo woo woo. The whistle sings to the heavens. The boat floats on the green water, the paddle wheel paddles the clear waves. Many years later, the East and the West engaged in a literary dispute over Frederick's poem Ode to a Ship, and Psyche ultimately took the blame. Frederick sailed back to Wessenberg on the Flying Tulip, intending to spend the journey in his cabin with Liluni and listen to her stories of the sea. The ship docked at a pier outside Cologne, but Frederick did not enter the city. Instead, he visited the bedridden King William at his estate outside the city. That evening, he dined with Crown Prince Rudolph and Crown Princess Antonia, exchanging a wealth of empty words. When the Flying Tulip set sail again, it was filled with passengers. A trade delegation from the Kingdom of Gaul, bound for Wessenberg, had delayed their trip due to the tulip incident. Frederick happened to be passing by, and everyone was interested in the ship, so he agreed to let them board. Steamships were high-tech, high-value-added products of the era, offering high profits and driving the entire industrial chain, making them a powerful tool for exporting goods. The Kingdom of Gaul was geographically advantageous, boasting a thriving agriculture and high grain production. Who else could they target? How else would they find the money to build their gardens? The Gallic trade delegation was unaware of Frederick's intentions. Prince Louis was relieved to learn of his agreement, having expected a refusal. Shortly after boarding the ship, Armand, a trusted aide of Frederick and an old friend who had sent him money 10 years prior, eagerly pulled Frederick into the nearest cabin. Within half a minute, a crowd of onlookers had gathered outside the cabin door, with Lulu and Louis pressing their ears to the door. Louis asked Lulu, "I've never heard of Wesson having such a hobby." "Did you know?" Lulu replied uncertainly. "I haven't heard of it either." For years, no one had mentioned Frederick's particular hobby, and no such rumors had circulated in Wayne. The Gallic nobles were also surprised, whispering among themselves. Many of them had known Armand since childhood, but they had never heard of him liking such things. A few minutes later, little Louis turned around with a look of disappointment on his face and said, "Disperse, disperse." Armand asking if Wesson has a special relationship with his sister is pointless. The surrounding Gallic nobles immediately dispersed amid boos. Armand's sister, Françoise, was Frederick's pen pal and the general agent for Wesson Paper and Gaul. After Frederick had built a great reputation in Venetian, it seemed logical that they would have something to do with each other. For the rest of the day, little Louis and his companions asked Lulu to show them around the ship, ignoring the two men. In the engine room, little Louis casually asked Lulu, "How much did you pay for this boat?" The Flying Tulip had docked at ports in the south and north of Gaul last year and recently. Many ship owners, seeing its advantage of not having to wait for wind at sea, expressed interest in purchasing it, but were concerned about the high price. Little Louis shared this plan. The Kingdom of Gaul was planning to expand in the inland sea, and having a fleet like this would be much easier. Lulu shook her head and replied, "I don't know. The Duke gave it to me." Little Louis's mouth twitched slightly, thinking that Duke Wesson was truly generous. Knowing that Frederick would be selling the ship, Lulu continued, "This is the first steamship. I heard it cost several thousand florins, but as more are built, the price will be cheaper. I'd guess it's around 1,000 florins. Currently, an unarmed schooner cost around 100 florins, and one steamship was equivalent to 10 schooners, exceeding many people's expectations." Little Louis thought Frederick might be asking for an exorbitant price, and he would negotiate with him properly. Don't be too eager in business negotiations, you'll get ripped off, especially after suffering heavy losses in the tulip market. Save wherever you can. Young Louis decided to build rapport with Frederick. Over dinner, he asked, "Which is the largest theater in Wessenberg?" "We're traveling with a troupe and planning to perform some operas." The Gallic kingdom boasted a high standard of opera, and they had brought a troupe to improve relations. Frederick, however, replied gloomily, "Wessenberg doesn't have a large theater. We only have a few small theaters that seat around 200 people. The nearest large theater is in Nuremberg, over an hour's train ride away. The only theater larger than that is the former Grand Duke Regens's theater, but that's a long way off." "How could that be?" young Louis asked, as if he had heard something incredible. "You didn't build a large theater?" He figured that every great noble had to build a theater that seated at least 500 people. Since Wessenberg was building the world's largest church and library, there was no reason not to build a theater. Although Frederick valued the educational value of drama and music, he wasn't particularly fond of opera at the time. With no need to attend plays or listen to music anymore, the matter fell into disuse. He then considered that many people were now improving musical instruments, and perhaps the orchestra would soon undergo a revolution, with someone proposing the symphony. Meanwhile, people were becoming increasingly affluent, and while movies were no longer an option, opera was becoming popular. Building a grand theater worthy of his station, he considered the theaters of the Grand Dukes of Regensburg and Franconia, which would cost about 80,000 florins, much of which would be spent on fine decoration. Furthermore, he reasoned that a symphony theater differed from an opera. The former could be a vast rectangular space, while the latter required semicircular seating. Adding in the land acquisition, each theater would cost about 200,000 florins, or 40,000 florins a year over a 5-year construction period, a staggering sum. No money, Frederick said helplessly. Little Louis found this answer quite inconceivable. Everyone knew the Duchy of Wesson was wealthy, yet he claimed to be broke? But a closer look eased his mind. Wesson had just concluded a war and was facing a massive debt for the Amstel fire, for which they had already issued 2 bonds. It wasn't surprising that they couldn't come up with the funds immediately. Frederick searched for a quick way to raise funds, and it seemed that kidnapping Louis the Younger and Fatty to blackmail the Kingdom of Gaul and the Ghazi Empire was the only option. He had no choice but to give up. Louis the Younger reasoned that his lack of funds meant he urgently needed new trading partners, which would give him an advantage in the upcoming negotiations. The Gallic prince had assumed that the trade negotiations involved presenting a list of goods to Frederick, who would then return it with marked prices. A group of people on his side would then discuss and come up with new prices, repeating this cycle until a deal was finally struck. The nobles in the Gallic delegation were all powerful families in certain sectors of the domestic business world. In the fleet behind the Flying Tulip, they brought with them professionals with in-depth knowledge of the quality, price, and market for specific goods. The delegation also included several expert negotiators, formidable figures in business negotiations, admired even by their opponents. Many believed they would secure significant benefits at the negotiation table. However, upon arriving in Weissenberg, the confident Gallic delegation was stunned. A trade fair? What was that? Chapter 371 First Contact. You don't know what a trade fair is, Your Majesty, please enlighten me, don't be so polite. Just treat me as a businessman. You can be magnanimous, but I must be polite. With deliberate manipulation, the Emperor of the Ghazi Empire and the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Gaul soon met in front of a pole dancing stage. Fatty thought that those from royal families were sensible, unlike some of the upstarts here who, for the sake of courtesy, would even dare to ask if he could grant him a nobility title. A so-called trade fair is really just a big market, he explained, according to his own understanding. Merchants with goods to sell set up stalls there, and buyers come to negotiate if they find something they like. The difference is that the first 10 days are only open to wholesalers, while the last 5 days are open to the public, allowing them to sell samples. This trade fair was planned by Master Psyche, president of the Wesson Scientific Society. Its full name is World Expo, and merchants from all over the country can participate, not just in Wesson. My people just arrived 2 days ago. I heard that Master Psyche originally only intended to host you, but then so many people wanted to attend that she postponed it until August. Little Louis was surprised to hear this. We didn't hear about it, he wondered. How could they call it World Expo without even mentioning our Kingdom of Gaul? Fatty thought for a moment and said, this expo is all about business, not politics, so it doesn't go through government channels. It's just a mutual invitation between merchants and chambers of commerce. Little Louis felt a little better after hearing this. He was only responsible for collecting taxes from merchants, not caring about how they traded, so it was normal that he hadn't heard about it. Fatty suddenly remembered something and added, oh, right, they established a rule from the beginning, everyone's doing business. Even countries at war must put aside their political differences and conduct business properly. If anything goes wrong, they can't come, and they can't even think about leaving. Little Louis nodded. He understood the rule. Who would dare come if they could get killed doing business? There was the recent example of the son of the Grand Duke of Franconia, who killed his own slaves in Wesson, and they were still floating in the wind on the city walls. In the end, not only did he lose his country and family, but he also implicated the neighboring Legends Confederation. The lights around the auditorium and the small theater dimmed slightly, while the stage remained brightly lit. The performance was about to begin, and Fatty fell silent. Little Louis turned around curiously and looked around. The audience was all men. 4 steel pipes, each as thick as a fist, stood on the stage in front, and a small band played music in the back. The music gradually became rhythmic, and 4 muscular men wearing only tight shorts appeared on the stage, stepping to the sound of the music. They raised their right hands to grasp the pole, their feet moving in the air in time with the music, like walking up a staircase, their entire bodies slowly ascending under the power of their arms. Once they reached a certain height, they placed one foot on the pole, the instep of their other foot resting on it. Then, they released their grip and slowly stretched their bodies until they were perpendicular to the pole, like a flag unfurling in the wind. To the rhythmic crescendo of the music, the 4 performers spun, leaped, and executed muscular poses to the rhythm. Many of the movements seemed counterintuitive, yet they were executed with the strength of their own muscles, seamlessly blending strength, skill, and artistry. Little Louis suddenly noticed that his feet had begun to tremble in time with the music, and his gait had changed as he left the theater after the performance. Fata took out his pocket watch to check the time, then turned to little Louis and asked, "I'm going to lunch now, and then I'll visit a friend's property this afternoon. Want to join us?" He saw that little Louis was trying to get close to him, so he offered an opportunity to see what they were up to. Little Louis immediately took over the conversation, replying, "This is my first time in Wessenland. I'm unfamiliar with the area, and I have many questions, Your Majesty. I'd be so bold as to ask for your help." Fata sensed his interest in engaging in a deeper conversation, so he said, "I know where in the city you can find the most authentic Sardinian cuisine. I'll treat you for lunch tonight." Little Louis naturally complied. Fata led him and his 2 attendants to the nearby main road, where they waited at the bus stop. Little Louis asked curiously, "What are we waiting for?" Before Fata could explain, a middle-aged man behind him, his military uniform and demeanor clearly indicating a high position of authority, said, "Your Highness, if my son isn't lying in his letter, I believe we're waiting for a public train." He then pointed to the railroad tracks before him and said, "These are the tracks for trains. They save a lot of energy." Little Louis nodded, indicating he understood. He asked the middle-aged man, "Prince Moritz, aren't you here to see your son?" Prince Moritz replied, "Since he's chosen to serve the Duke of Wesson, he must do so wholeheartedly. The war isn't over yet, so I can't disturb him." Armand, standing nearby, said, "I heard the Wesson army has a special messenger service that can deliver messages to serving soldiers. Why don't you write him a letter?" Prince Moritz thought for a moment and said, "We'll talk about it after the situation stabilizes." At that moment, a city steam train arrived with a sound of bells. A 10-horsepower engine led the way, pulling 2 open carriages. They boarded the less crowded open carriage at the back, and Fata gave the conductor a silver coin, leaving no change. The train passed through Wessenberg's main thoroughfare, passing the German cathedral and the Edelweiss library under construction. The group disembarked at a station not far from the Wessenbank headquarters. Fata acted as a tour guide along the way, explaining the new things and streets and alleys he saw along the way. At this time, pointing to the Wessenbank building in front, he said to little Louis, "There are many people in Wessenbank who are from the Kingdom of Sardinia. Their cafeteria has authentic Sardinian cuisine. Ordinary people are not allowed to go in there. I applied for a Crown VIP card yesterday, which allows me to go in and eat for free. There is no free lunch in the world." Little Louis asked, "It's not cheap to apply for such a VIP card, right?" Fata said nonchalantly, "Personal deposit accounts in Wessenbank have levels, and the calculation is a bit complicated. I just remember that over 20 florins is level 1. And you get a star. Over 128 florins is a moon, and over 1,280 florins is a sun. Anyway, the more money you have, the more stars you get. 4 stars make a moon, 4 moons make a sun, and 4 suns make a crown. The higher the level, the more money you need to upgrade. In the end, if you want to reach the crown, you need more than 17,408 florins." Little Louis' heart nearly stopped at the low-key display of wealth. Converted to gold, that's over 600 kilograms. The Gallic nobility were widely involved in the tulip trade, and suddenly, the glittering gold had disappeared without a trace. Now, the mere mention of money made them react. Fata's lips curled slightly. He'd been overwhelmed by the bustling ironworks, the deafening hum of the looms in the textile mills, and the incomprehensible steam engine factories. After a while, he realized his only advantage was his wealth, so he wouldn't miss the opportunity to regain his sense of superiority. Raising this money had emptied the emperor's treasury, but it was well worth it. The order was nearly finalized, and they were waiting for the final signing of the contract at next month's trade fair, when export tariffs were available. Preliminary calculations suggested the return shipment would yield at least a threefold profit. "Hey, the loan's approved, I'm going to be rich," a middle-aged man suddenly burst out of Wessenland Bank, waving a brown paper bag in his right hand and his coat in his left, dancing like crazy. A woman selling milk tea on a tricycle across from the gate shook her head and said, "Another crazy one." The middle-aged man ran frantically in circles on the street in front of the bank. A middle-aged woman and a boy, no more than 10 years old, rushed out. They tried to hold him back, but couldn't, and were dragged to the ground. Fatty and little Louis, who considered themselves well-informed, were stunned by this scene. The security guard at the gate rushed back and expertly slapped the middle-aged man twice. "What loan? That's just toilet paper." The middle-aged man fainted, only to be reawakened by 2 more slaps. When he regained consciousness, he was in the middle of the street, hugging his wife and children, crying bitterly. A man in a suit emerged from the bank. He appeared to recognize them and chatted with them. The family, supporting each other, sat down on the sidewalk to rest. Fatty recognized the man in the suit and called him over to ask him a few questions, finally understanding the situation. He told little Louis, "That guy makes butter. He's been researching something strange for the past few years, leaving the business to his wife. Now it seems to be a success." Little Louis asked curiously, "I just don't know what he's come up with. Is it a new way to enjoy milk?" No one but the man involved could answer this question. His research was so secretive that if it weren't for the raw material being milk, he would have been investigated long ago. Just then, a square car, without horses or steam engines, honked its horn and raced up to the bank. An elderly man in a tuxedo emerged from it. Fatty frowned and whispered, "That's Wessen's car, and that man is his butler." Little Louis also frowned and said, "He's in such a hurry. Could it be that Wesson needs money?" The two of them took the matter seriously, wondering if there was something big going on. However, Afu soon emerged from the bank. The middle-aged man who had gone mad earlier was sitting on the side of the road drinking milk tea. The whole family was invited into a car and driven to a nearby castle. Fatty and little Louis looked at each other, confused as to what Frederick was up to. Little Louis said, "Could it be that Wesson really likes drinking milk?" Fatty thought for a moment and said, "It's possible. He started the tradition of giving milk to children here." The two thought this was very likely and planned to ask what was so delicious that Frederick sent his butler to pick him up, so that they could try it themselves. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372 Milk Turns into Glue. After returning to Wessenberg from Amstel, Frederick was busy. He had to make final decisions on personnel arrangements in the newly conquered territories, guarding the new borders, and relations with new neighbors. The newspaper debates over women's participation in the labor force, equal pay for equal work, and simple and accessible logical language intensified. Emperor Fatty of the Ghazi Empire personally wrote an article in support of simple language, stating, "Friends who have served as emperors know that when your ministers conceal their true intentions behind abstruse rhetoric and logic as convoluted as pig intestines, you want to smear your shoe on their faces." Princess Lola of Sardinia, who had met Frederick on the Isle of Oranges, returned recently because her husband was researching a new musical instrument in Wesson. After having her translator read the newspaper for 2 days, she published an article in the White Stork Times, arguing that pay for equal quality, quantity, and time should not be divided by gender. The article seemed to tinge with resentment. The debate over whether women should work outside the home was exacerbated by a divorce lawsuit. The woman was Frederick's older sister, whom he had sought technical support for when he began researching textile machinery. Following the industry's growth, she became a key technician at a textile mill, earning 70% of the family income. 2 days ago, unable to tolerate her husband's chronic alcoholism, she filed for divorce. Her husband, while simultaneously filing for divorce, also sued the mill for incitement to divorce. He argued that when he beat her before, she hadn't dared to say a word, but after working at the mill, she had initially fought back, and now, he dared to divorce her. Frederick remained silent on either issue, both to allow the debate to deepen and get to the heart of the matter, and to wait for the church to speak first, as many of the problems lay with him. So, he simply instructed his secretary, Vanessa, to instruct the Secretariat to sort and organize the relevant news and article clippings for further review at their leisure. This morning's work was much lighter than the previous 2 days. Yesterday, Fatty had sent a male-winged unicorn to Dawn for a mating. Frederick wanted to see if they were compatible, so he had the Secretariat deliver only urgent and super-urgent documents today, leaving the regular ones on hold. Among the official documents arriving at Frederick's office, a document from Psyche was even more urgent than urgent, contained in a black file box. Frederick was about to leave work early when the dark box arrived. Frederick's expression suddenly hardened when he saw Vanessa enter with a black file box. Psyche, having lived countless years and traveled countless worlds, was no one who didn't know the importance of such a formal document. The document in the box today wasn't about a magician's research on the verge of history, nor was it about someone's research on the path to human destruction, nor was it about someone breeding cold-resistant mosquitoes to try to fill the mosquito-free winters of Wesson State. Instead, it was a freshly minted patent. Frederick carefully reviewed it and immediately rushed to the office door, shouting, "Afu, get this guy here." Afu didn't hesitate. The patent document had the applicant's address. He first went to the butter factory and learned that the owner and his family had gone to Wesson Bank to apply for a loan and had left a car there to avoid missing them. Then he went to Wesson Bank to look for the person. When Afu and his men returned to the castle, it was lunchtime, and Frederick invited the family to join him. The meal was simple: tender and juicy roast pork shoulder on a bed of sauerkraut, surrounded by a circle of mashed potato balls, a vegetable soup, and a beer or happy water. Maria worked in her own publishing house, Susan wrote medical records at the hospital, and they usually didn't come home for lunch. Psyche rode her scooter around, exploring delicious food, and Lulu was away at a shipyard. At lunch, only Frederick was in the dining room. The guests were very reserved. Even when Frederick told them to relax, the three of them moved like golems with their joints oiled, their hands trembling slightly as they held their silver knives and forks. Frederick politely asked the three people's names. Saul, the middle-aged man, a business owner with a strong sense of rapport, immediately introduced himself. His wife and children stammered their names. Frederick kindly inquired about Saul's children's school life, their academic performance, whether they were getting along well with their classmates, and whether they had less homework. The child almost stood up at first, as if to answer a question in class, but Frederick persuaded him to sit down and talk while they ate. After this conversation, the family relaxed considerably. Frederick then inquired about Saul's butter factory sales, whether local officials were imposing arbitrary levies or taking bribes, and whether there were any local gangs collecting protection money. Saul took the opportunity to complain, "Now the mafia doesn't charge protection fees. In the past, we bought milk directly from dairy farmers. They signed exclusive purchasing contracts with dairy farmers, and we could only buy from them." Frederick asked, "From a business point of view, if someone can buy milk from scattered dairy farmers and sell it to you in a centralized manner, wouldn't they reduce your purchasing costs?" Saul immediately replied, "In theory, it's indeed easier for me not to have to hire people to run around, but those people mix milk and starch into the water, and the milk I buy back is very bad." Frederick nodded and said, "There will be more people in the mine." Saul shrank his neck. According to the laws of the state of Wesson, the death penalty after a direct death penalty means being sent to a dangerous mine to mine. Generally speaking, no one can survive for 5 years. Frederick continued, "Go back and talk with your colleagues. Collect all the methods used to adulterate milk and send them here. I plan to publish milk quality standards. When you sign contracts, you can agree on quality based on these standards. If the quality doesn't meet the requirements, you have the right to reject the milk and file a claim under the contract." Saul immediately exclaimed, "That's great. We argue about milk quality for hours every day." Previously, the canton of Wesson only had national standards for construction and industrial materials like screws and nuts, cement, and metal. After lunch that day, these standards began to extend to the food industry, expanding their scope. People later jokingly referred to the various national standards as milk laws. Frederick then asked how butter was produced today. In the past, milk was poured into a narrow, deep wooden barrel with a hole in the lid. A wooden pestle was used to pound it up and down, separating the oil and water and releasing the butter. The labor cost was very high. Saul explained that he had taken out a loan a few years ago to buy a steam engine and had a blacksmith help him optimize and build a machine. The steam engine drives numerous wire claws, like those in an egg beater, to spin at high speed, quickly separating the butter from the barrel. The skim milk from the separated butter was then cooked into curds and sold as snacks. He had been wondering why the Duke had come to him for no apparent reason. It couldn't be just a meal. Halfway through his roast pork shoulder, he realized it might be related to his patent. Sure enough, after discussing butter production, Frederick asked, "How did you come up with the invention you're applying for a loan for today?" Saul blushed with excitement when his leader asked him about this. Old Wessonians knew, as evidenced by countless examples, that any industry the Duke of Wesson was interested in was bound to be extremely profitable. "Butter factories attract rats and bugs," he said seriously. "What we do is mix borax with food and put it in a box. Rats and bugs will die after eating it. The other day, there was a bucket of milk left there after making butter, and I forgot to boil it. When it was found, there were already milk residues. I happened to be making rat poison, so I asked my wife to pour out the clean water in the bucket, wash the milk residue and use it as bait. I first dissolved the borax with warm water, squeezed out the milk residue and poured it in to cook into paste. I didn't expect that the paste was actually a very good glue. It's very strong. When it's completely dry, grind it into powder and dissolve it with water. It can still stick to things." Then I thought, this kind of glue dissolves when it comes into contact with water, so can I add other things to the milk residue to make it not afraid of water? Frederick listened carefully. After traveling to this world for so many years, the steam engine has been invented, but there has been no use for glue. The glue made by slime can only be used as hot melt glue. Usually, to stick paper, you can only boil starch to make some paste. Now, Saul had stumbled upon several types of casein glue. Once the mold-proofing issue was resolved, plywood production could begin. With a booming trade in Wesson, shipping boxes were in high demand. With numerous construction sites, wooden formwork for concrete pouring was in high demand. Not to mention furniture and carriages, these two alone could generate considerable profits. However, plywood wasn't easily produced. The wood type, moisture content, size and thickness of the wood chips, and the pressure and temperature during processing all required extensive experimentation. The Saul family left shortly after lunch, and Frederick had their silverware washed, placed in a beautiful box, and presented to them. This was a treat for everyone dining at the castle for the first time. Frederick returned to his office, wrote a memorandum regarding plywood production, and glanced at the wall clock. He didn't have time to visit Dawn and her boyfriend anymore. He had a meeting at the cathedral construction site that afternoon. Chapter 373. Don't miss any opportunity to make money. After leaving the castle, Saul's story began a new chapter. Wesson Bank had prepared a comfortable carriage and parked it at the castle gates. The vice president in charge of loans personally invited them aboard and took them to the bank's most luxurious VIP room. He said Saul's loan amount could be increased fivefold, and if production expanded after the first batch of products was ready, he could get even more. Then came the secretary of the new governor of Wesson State, Ahmet, who invited Saul to his office the next day for tea to discuss how knowledge could be converted into gold. When Saul returned home, he found many carriages parked outside, all of them investors looking to partner. While no one had absolute confidence in themselves, they all trusted the Duke of Wesson's vision. The next morning, the second edition of the Wesson Daily featured another story about an overnight fortune made through tireless invention. Everyone loved this story, so much so that the front page headline, about the Duke of Wesson issuing a city and rural cleanup campaign due to poor hygiene at a construction site cafeteria that had caused dozens of people to suffer diarrhea, received little attention. On the edge of a village east of Weissenberg, Fata said to little Louis, "The most terrifying thing about Wesson is that his decrees reach every village." Little Louis nodded and said, "He also knows how to delegate power, handing over some authority to those below him so he can focus on the big picture." Fata narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "He can only do that because his domain lacks powerful nobles." Little Louis nodded. The royal family has always had a tradition of centralizing state power. Through the tug-of-war between various kings and nobles, it has had some success. It's better than the fragmented state of the Rhine Confederation, but it's far worse than the state of Wesson, which can mobilize every man in every village. The Ghazi Empire, on the other hand, is even more problematic, with its numerous warlords. Fata himself was a warlord, but his father was emperor. After his father's death, he survived a massacre by his brothers and sisters before becoming emperor. He knew that centralization was beneficial, but he had to eliminate all the warlords first, which was a significant challenge. They had come to inspect the village's swampland reclamation project today and happened to catch the villagers' council meeting in the threshing ground. The documents for the urban and rural cleanliness campaign arrived in the village head's hands yesterday afternoon, and a meeting was held this morning to discuss them. The efficiency of the meeting astonished the guests. Today's village council meeting addressed the implementation of the urban and rural cleanliness campaign. The specific proposals were to fill in stagnant ponds, regulations on penalties for littering, and penalties for those found urinating or defecating in public within the village. The first required the use of village funds to pay workers for the work, while the second two were village rules and regulations, to be voted on by each household. Many men in these families had been drafted and had not yet returned, and over half the attendees were women. All three proposals were quickly passed. The wages for filling the ponds had precedent, so they would be accepted accordingly. Someone brought up the fine for littering in Wessenland, but the amount was considered too high. So it was lowered and passed. The third proposal took longer to discuss. The women felt that urinating or defecating in public was something only men would do. One particularly aggressive woman proposed smearing chili oil on the tools used to commit the crime, and the proposal was finally passed. Fatty and little Louis looked at each other, gasping. The meeting ended, and the villagers began their work for the day. This village is somewhat unique. Most of the land is swampland. Once a place of extreme poverty, it has recently become renowned for its prosperity. The terrain here is unique. Unlike lowland areas, where water was pumped out and reclaimed for farmland, the marshland was first filled and embanked, dividing it into rectangular plots of 3,000 to 5,000 square meters. Then, pits were dug to create fish ponds. Ditches run along the embankments, allowing for drainage and replenishment from the river. Fish abound. Each pond has several windmill-powered pumps that draw water from the bottom of the pond and return it via artificial cascades to replenish oxygen. A floating bridge extends through the center, used for feeding the fish. The fish in the ponds reproduce naturally, and large mesh nets are regularly used to remove the larger fish, leaving the younger ones behind. What surprised the guests was that square floating beds, 2 or 3 meters on each side, were planted with aquatic vegetables and medicinal herbs common in swamps. People donned life jackets and paddled rafts to harvest the already grown vegetables. Little Louis sighed. People here won't miss out on any opportunity to make money. The people around him nodded repeatedly. Everyone had seen fish ponds, and some of the vegetables from the marshes were quite tasty, but no one had ever thought of combining the two. Prince Moritz said dejectedly, if they won't miss out on any opportunity to make money, then why haven't they taken advantage of the tulip trade? His question was what many of the Gallic nobles were wondering. If the Duke of Wesseland was so obsessed with profit, why did he ban the tulip trade? It was said that he had even argued with Armand's sister over this. They had all recently suffered heavy losses from the tulip bubble. It would have been easier if everyone had lost money together, but now someone different stood here and predicted that the business was doomed, which was really hard to bear. Armand said seriously, because the Duke of Wesseland has mastered the laws of business and knows which businesses are profitable and which are not. Everyone looked at him, speaking in Gallic. Fatty, with his translator, turned away after hearing this. If someone else had said this, no one would have believed it, but Armand's sister had a close relationship with Frederick and might know something. Armand continued, the Duke of Wesseland's recently published book, The Nature and Study of Wealth, explains that commodities have a use value and a selling price. Tulips have a limited use value, so it's abnormal for their selling price to far exceed their use value. Eventually, the selling price will return to normal, Prince Moritz said somewhat unconvincedly. Tulips do have a use value, however, his words lacked conviction. In the Kingdom of Gaul, where tulips were primarily consumed, the flower's only use was as a decoration pinned to a party or worn on a hat while hunting. Armand continued. The supply of goods and the number of buyers are also important factors in determining the selling price. When the supply far exceeds the demand, the price will drop. Everyone looked at Prince Moritz. His family cultivated the most tulips in Gaul and had also cultivated many new varieties. As producers, his family was the only one making money from the tulip business. However, he had invested all that money in acquiring new varieties to cultivate more, and ultimately suffered heavy losses. Forget it, Prince Moritz sighed. Bygones are bygones. Now the important thing is to look forward, the other Gallic nobles sighed, unable to move on. What else could they do? Fatty then told them, tulips aren't just beautiful flowers, they also have medicinal properties. The bulbs are poisonous, but not to humans. They can be used as an emetic. They're very poisonous to wolves and dogs. Hunters in our area dry the bulbs and use them in bait to hunt wolves, with good results. Little Louis thanked him for the information and asked curiously, "How did you know all this?" Fatty was even more curious. "Didn't you know that tulips came from us?" The gulls all shook their heads. Fatty, unsure of what to say, gestured to the riverside construction site. A fish processing plant was being planned. The fish would be canned or made into fish balls, and the leftovers would be dried, ground into fish meal, and sold as feed. Little Louis sighed again. Even fish bones are being used to make money. These people really won't miss out on any opportunity to make money. The group had spent the entire morning observing the village. As they were about to leave, they heard cheers from within. The guests sent someone to inquire and learned that the conscripted militia had all returned. Chapter 374, Scare People. Fatty had visited and inspected numerous places in and around Wessenland, believing he'd developed a resistance to novelty and wouldn't be surprised by anything. That was until he arrived at the ironworks and stood before the 10-meter-tall furnace. Little Louis and the others were speechless with amazement, their mouths wide open enough to fit a goose egg. Frederick stood nearby, gazing at his guests with a smug look. He'd deliberately chosen this spot for their first meeting precisely for this effect. The original furnace was a simple, 5-meter-tall blast furnace he remembered from the book Primitive Iron Making. Thanks to the efforts of the smelter's director, Alfred, the furnace gradually grew taller and larger, and production steadily increased. Little Louis winked at Armand, who immediately went over to ask Frederick. Pointing to the full-height metal head atop the furnace, Armand asked, "What's that hat for?" Everyone had seen a standard ironworks furnace. It looked like an upside-down bucket with a hole in the top, but this was the first time he'd seen one with a large hat. Frederick said nonchalantly, "That's the air preheater. It heats the air." The air preheater was his first invention in the smelting industry since his arrival. Thinking back to when he was a little kid, taking advantage of his father's absence at the war, he'd gone to the blacksmith's shop to have the furnace's air duct modified. If only he hadn't been rolling around on the ground, no one would have paid attention. It was a rather sad thought. This minor improvement could raise the furnace temperature, but he kept it secret, so no one else knew about it. It wouldn't matter if he made it public now. Small furnaces are inefficient, so if he wanted to build larger ones, he had to first solve the material problem. The biggest challenge in building such a large blast furnace was materials. The increased furnace volume meant more coke burned, and the resulting temperature rose accordingly. The silica-containing refractory bricks used in the lining were invented after 2 years of unsuccessful experiments, copying the buck traditional methods of making refractory materials. This was one of the core technologies. Frederick led everyone around the charging table to the other side of the furnace, where a steam engine powered a blower, pumping air into the furnace. A duct extended from the furnace to the top, connecting it to the preheater. Another duct extended from the preheater into a row of pointed boxes on a nearby shelf. "That's the dust collector," Frederick said. The smelter was located north of Wessenland, and when the north wind blew in winter, smoke drifted toward the city. Furthermore, Frederick's castle, high on the hilltop, was so thick with dust that the maids almost wanted to pack it up in large plastic bags. The guests showed little interest in the environmental protection measures and instead stood outside the iron fence to observe the blower. Frederick immediately warned them. Someone curiously reached out to touch it before, got sucked in, and lost their entire hand. Now they're working as security guards thanks to the disability employment policy. In the factory, every rule, every safety measure, is based on the lessons learned from blood, even lives. Those who actually tried to touch it were frightened and took a step back. At that moment, a rhythmic whistle blared nearby, and a bustle of activity erupted around a similar iron-making furnace nearby. Frederick, a frequent visitor, said to the guests, "That furnace is about to tap. Let's go take a look." The guests were waiting for this moment, flocking to the area designated for viewings and learning by the furnace. 2 doctors with first aid kits were on standby, ready for emergencies. In front of the furnace's tap hole stood a pit for ladles, along with rails for a manual gantry crane and a small steam locomotive. A locomotive had already backed up to bring a ladle carriage cart to the furnace. The preheated ladle, secured with brackets and insulation, was lowered to the tap hole by a gantry crane. Once everything was ready, the workers opened the tap hole, and bright orange molten iron gushed out into the ladle. Once the molten iron was exhausted, the tap hole closed, the molten iron car was removed, and the workers opened the side slag drain to clear the slag from the furnace floor. The scorching slag was loaded into heat-resistant carts. Once filled, they slid forward along a sloping railroad track. The track ended in a vast pool, where the slag immediately crumbled due to the drastic temperature fluctuations. The pool was made of cement, with a slope bottom. At the bottom, shovels-like excavators scooped up the crushed slag for transport to the cement factory. At the iron-making furnace, workers opened the feed port above. A belt fed pellets, a precisely proportioned mixture of concentrate, coke, and lime, into the furnace. A device on the top evenly distributed the pellets throughout the furnace. The guests watched with rapt attention as the materials were added to one furnace. As soon as one furnace was filled, the next furnace began tapping iron. Fata estimated that a single furnace like this could produce at least 1 ton of iron per day. Looking at this cluster of furnaces, just one of them, preliminary estimates suggest that the entire state of Wesson could produce approximately 100,000 tons of steel annually. Steel represents combat power. If Frederick wanted to, he could easily turn the entire territory into Tinkin in a year. Fat aside, if he had 30,000 elite armored soldiers, there wouldn't be many warlords in the country. Little Louis subconsciously bit his lip. It would be great if he had as many iron furnaces. However, the Kingdom of Gaul has developed agriculture and iron ore, but lacks coal, while the Rhine Confederation lacks iron ore but not coal. In the past, there were calls to capture the Rhine Confederation's coal-producing areas. Now, considering the steel production in Wessenland, it would be a big deal if they pushed everyone to the limit and turned everyone into an iron can. For Frederick, the biggest obstacle restricting the development of the steel industry is the supply of iron ore. He is now frantically searching for iron ore everywhere. He has also set his sights on the Ghazi Empire and the Kingdom of Gaul, but he won't mention it for now. He will deal with it when they realize their trade deficit is too large. Fatty was in urgent need of arming himself, and he immediately told Frederick, "I intend to purchase weapons and equipment for 10,000 men this year." According to his standards, the combined mail, scale armor, and weapons for an elite soldier would require approximately 30 kilograms of steel, or 300 tons for 10,000 men. Procuring this much material from the territory he controlled back home wouldn't be a problem, but it would take too long. Here, it would be much quicker. The raw materials alone would only take a few days. However, Frederick hesitated, saying, "I plan to expand the army to 120,000 this year, with conscription beginning in September. Springfield Arsenal is heavily loaded and can't spare any resources." Before Fata could react, the people of the Kingdom of Gaul nearby gasped. The Wesson army was only 20,000 strong, yet it was so potent. With 120,000 men and such extensive steel production capacity, who could possibly stop them? Frederick had brought these two groups here today simply to show off his strength, so he naturally didn't tell them that only those 120,000 men were on par with the current army. The rest were second-tier city and border troops, with far inferior equipment and training, and naturally much lower maintenance costs. It seemed the effect had been achieved. Fata's distance aside, the people of the Kingdom of Gaul had just exchanged glances. Under Frederick's prestige, many people didn't immediately notice a problem. The current Wesson army had been forged over a decade. Expanding it several times over would be like pouring a bottle of strong liquor into a water tank. At least in the short term, its combat effectiveness would be severely impacted. More importantly, the officers, especially the senior officers, were the most critical. Commanding 100 men was different from commanding 500, and the gap between commanding 10,000 and 100,000 was even greater. The latter required a natural talent boost. Within each nation, those capable of commanding such a large force were veterans, while the officers of the Wesson army were remarkably young, with no senior officer over 40 years old. This indicated that the Wesson army's combat effectiveness would be significantly diminished in the short term. Frederick hadn't told them that his military expansion plan was actually a multi-year plan. The year 1034 marked the second year of the territory's second 5-year plan, which ran from 1033 to 1037. The problems caused by the expansion had nearly scrapped the original plan. The primary tasks for the next few years of the second 5-year plan were to consolidate the new territory, clean up its territories, establish a comprehensive administrative system, and assess economic, population, and resource data in preparation for the third 5-year plan of major development, which began in 1038. The associated military expansion and administrative system improvements were to be completed gradually during the second 5-year plan, without any immediate rush. However, Outsiders didn't know this. Once the news got out, it frightened neighbors, who feared Frederick would suddenly send troops to their doorsteps. With a single word, Frederick created a favorable external environment, buying him time to overcome his weakness. Chapter 375, Fighting for Proud. The guests from afar were deeply impressed by the iron-making blast furnaces, and they felt a little uneasy, so they tried to find a balance. Frederick's territory, located inland, was once a typical agricultural economy. Landlords had little surplus food, and little money to invest in cultural development, leading to its reputation as a cultural slum. Thus, the lords from the Kingdom of Gaul found an opening. While the cathedral and the great library were still under construction, they repeatedly lamented the city of Weissenberg's lack of a theater or even a bronze statue. Their implication was that the city was a bunch of nouveau-riche bumpkins, devoid of any cultural heritage. The elderly Wesson residents of Weissenberg, the principality of the Wesson state, were furious. The Wesson state had experienced rapid growth in recent years, recently expanding its territory and on the verge of establishing the Duchy of Wesson. Their confidence was surging. How could they allow themselves to be mocked by those country bumpkins who lacked running water and flush toilets? The Wesson State Parliament currently oversaw the government, voting on whether laws were passed, and serving as a channel for communication between the public and government. Within 2 days, representatives of the State Assembly arrived at the castle with a petition to meet with Duke Wesson. Frederick didn't neglect them and formally met with the Assembly representatives in the living room. When Bryant arrived at the castle over a decade ago, he was the Wesson family's blacksmith, managing the smithy and a grassroots leader. Things were different now. His blacksmith shop had been merged into the heavy machinery factory a few years ago, and he was now deputy director of production. He had also been elected to the State Assembly, and some elderly people even addressed him as master. Greeting him at the castle gate was Frederick's personal maid, Taro. Both were elders of the Wesson family. Bryant said with emotion, "The last time I came to the castle, you were a little girl, running around after the master. Now you're the mother of 2 children." Taro smiled and said, "You're a grandfather now." The two chatted as they entered the living room. Taro poured tea while Bryant solemnly presented the petition to the assembly. Frederick took it and carefully flipped through the first 2 pages. Presumably, some of his conversation with little Louis on the boat that day had leaked. The petition urged him to build a theater and erect a bronze statue. "I understand your wishes," Frederick said solemnly, "but I don't have the funds right now. As you know, I recently issued 2 bonds in a row. I can't issue a third for this purpose." Bryant understood the rationale. Someone in Parliament had mentioned this point, and he had a plan. He said, "We don't need to build the most expensive theater right away. We can make a plan first, starting with a cheaper bronze statue." Frederick nodded slightly. If it was a bronze statue, it would be easier. His savings could afford to build several. Bronze statues today are typically life-size, about 3 meters tall when enlarged. Production takes between 2 months and a year, depending on size and complexity. The most time-consuming part is creating the wax model, which requires meticulous craftsmanship from a master. Frederick finally agreed. It was unreasonable not to fight back after being bullied so directly. He said to Bryant, "Let's build the statue first. I'll draw the sketches today, and you can come over tomorrow and see which one is easiest to build." Bryant rarely visited the castle, and when he left, Frederick asked Taro to bring him back 2 cured ducks and a few pounds of sausages. These were made on a whim, not expensive, but they emphasized his regard for the other party as a family member. Large bronze statues today primarily focus on religion and imperial power. Although Frederick had his own ideas, he wanted to avoid straying too far from tradition. So he began by sketching an angel of victory, with a sword raised in his right hand, turning back and extending his left hand to call the crowd forward. The statue would stand in the center of Weissenberg's main square, with the castle in the distance to the north and the cathedral and the great library to the east and west. He sketched the sketch in pencil, with details added by professionals. With the second statue, Frederick broke free from the constraints of religion and imperial power. The territory truly lacked historical depth. No immortals had ever visited the mountain, and no dragon had been caught long ago by his father. He could only delve into modern history. Bryant's arrival reminded him of the old blacksmith shop, which had long served as the Wesson family's arsenal, but was now being demolished due to technological upgrades and industrial expansion. Frederick planned to erect a bronze statue on the side of the smithy, depicting a blacksmith and a soldier facing each other, the soldier raising his hands to receive a longsword from the blacksmith. The site of the final decisive battle of the 6 days' defense was a key artery in and out of Wessenland, with roads, railways, and waterways passing through it. A bronze statue of a soldier standing guard would be erected by the water. The first smelter would be a grand affair, with a bronze relief depicting over 20 steelworkers in various positions marching side by side, their work scenes depicted behind them. Outside the city walls, by the harbor, the lawn next to the first kindergarten now houses a water tower and is surrounded by a lawn garden. It was once a children's playground, and a bronze statue of a kindergarten teacher reading stories could also be erected. There's also the University of Wessenland, let's say, studying for a ball. Anyway, there's no such pun here. Frederick worked late into the night, designing bronze statues for everyone from bank tellers to steamed buns and malt sugar makers. 36 of them, he figured, would take years. Bryant came the next day for breakfast, took his sketches with him, and then returned for dinner, submitting a request. The Parliament Statue Construction Committee is requesting the use of an airship. Frederick was surprised. Bryant had been involved in the airship's construction, so he must have known what it was used for. And what the hell was this Statue Construction Committee? It couldn't be some sort of place to hire people with connections. Bryant said over roast pork ribs, "The statues I designed need a master model. We're short-handed, so we telegraphed Wayne City. They agreed, and we need an airship to bring them back." Frederick knew Wayne City had a strong artistic scene. It was the capital of the Osmega Empire, with its rich market for dignitaries and sculptors, so it wasn't surprising that he was seeking talent there. Is it so urgent? He began to feel something was amiss. Wayne was about 500 kilometers away from Wessenland. It would take several days for a ship to go upstream, and almost 20 hours for an airship, meaning a round trip of 2 days. The pilots couldn't work long hours because they had to take on replacements, and the airships had limited capacity, so they couldn't bring back many people. Most importantly, airships belonged to the Air Force, and deploying the military was no joke. Frederick believed that Bryant and the congressman understood these principles, but they still made such a request. Was there a reason? Seeing that Frederick didn't understand, Bryant told him the reason that everyone had discussed. "Sir, building bronze statues is a war without bloodshed. We must build all the bronze statues before the end of the expo." Frederick was frightened and said, "It takes several months to make a bronze statue. There is almost a month left for the expo. It will be too late. That's 36 bronze statues, not 3 or 6. We need to prepare manpower, materials, and venues." He has presided over many large projects in his 2 lifetimes. Although he doesn't know how to cast bronze statues, no matter what you do, you need people, materials, and machines. From these 3 aspects, you can see where the problem lies. "We've already made it in time," Bryant said confidently. "We've already started. Today we'll start making the inner mold and wax coating. An average sculptor can lead an apprentice to carve the initial shape, and the masters will complete the fine details after they arrive. The mold will be ready in 10 to 15 days, and the wax can be baked out and the mold dried in 3 days. We can pour the part on the same day, and the splicing, polishing, and final installation will take 10 days. We can also work on the base at the same time, so we can catch up. Those country bumpkins who use flush toilets as a water source say we have no historical heritage. Humph, we'll create history for them to see." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.